The sea was calm, and that was the problem. In the darkness off Guadalcanal, nothing moved fast enough to draw attention. No alarms sounded, no searchlights cut the night. Allied warships drifted in loose formation, crews tired from days of tension, convinced that the real danger lay somewhere else. What they did not know was that the battle had already begun, silently, methodically, and perfectly timed. This was the Battle of Savo Island, a fight decided almost entirely in darkness, and one of the most shocking naval defeats in Allied history. The context mattered. Just days earlier, Allied forces had landed on Guadalcanal, opening the first major offensive against Japan in the Pacific. It was risky, hurried, and incomplete. But it worked. An airfield was seized, a foothold was established. And with that success came a dangerous assumption, that the enemy would need time to respond. They did not. The waters around Guadalcanal were crowded with ships protecting transports, unloading supplies, and guarding sea lanes. Command was fragmented. Patrols overlapped imperfectly. Fatigue dulled alertness. The invasion had succeeded, and that success bred complacency. The Imperial Japanese Navy exploited it immediately. Japanese naval doctrine emphasized night combat. Crews were trained to operate without lights, to strike at close range, and to disengage before the enemy could organize a response. Their cruisers carried powerful guns and deadly torpedoes, and their commanders understood that surprise was the most decisive weapon at sea. Under cover of darkness, a Japanese task force slipped through gaps in the Allied screen, and radar contacts were missed or misunderstood. Warnings were delayed. Confusion spread faster than orders could be given. When the first shells struck, they did so with devastating accuracy. Bridges were hit. Engine rooms were wrecked. Searchlights flared briefly and became aiming points. Ships burned where they lay, some crippled before they could fire a meaningful shot. The battle unfolded in minutes. Allied cruisers were overwhelmed. Formations dissolved. Command and control vanished under shock and fire. And then, just as suddenly, it was over. The Japanese force withdrew into the night, leaving behind wreckage, sinking ships, and stunned survivors. By dawn, the scale of the disaster was impossible to ignore. Multiple Allied warships lay on the seabed. Hundreds of sailors were dead. And the waters would soon earn a name that reflected the cost paid beneath the surface. Ironbottom Sound. The Battle of Savo Island mattered not only because of what was lost, but because of what it revealed. It exposed gaps in coordination. It demonstrated the lethal effectiveness of night doctrine. It showed how fragile naval superiority could be when vigilance faltered. Yet the story does not end in defeat. The transports survived. The beachhead on Guadalcanal held. The campaign continued. Savo Island was a tactical catastrophe, but not a strategic knockout. And in that contradiction lies its importance. The battle forced rapid change. Radar procedures improved. Command structures tightened. Night fighting doctrine evolved. The price of inexperience had been paid in full, and the lesson would not be forgotten. The Battle of Savo Island reminds us that wars are shaped as much by failure as by success, by nights when confidence collapses, by moments when preparation proves insufficient, by lessons learned too late, but learned permanently. Tonight, we return to those dark waters off Guadalcanal, to the sudden flashes of gunfire, to the ships that never saw their enemy, to the battle that taught the Pacific War its first truly brutal lesson at sea. This is the history of the Battle of Savo Island. The submersible descends through layers of blue that darken with each passing second. At 300 feet, the light from the surface becomes a memory. At 600, the pilot switches on the floods. At 900 feet, something massive materializes from the gloom, a wall of rusted steel, barnacle-encrusted, silent. The wreck of USS Quincy rests here, her hull torn open like paper, her guns still aimed at an enemy she never saw. This is Ironbottom Sound, and the seabed is crowded with ghosts. 47 major warships rest in these waters north of Guadalcanal, more concentrated naval tonnage than almost anywhere on Earth. And most of them sank during a 6-month campaign that determined whether America would fight or fall in the Pacific. But one night created more wreckage than all the others combined. August 8, 1942. The sun sets over Savo Island with the kind of tropical beauty that makes men forget where they are. The water between Savo and Florida Island glows orange, then purple, then black. Local fishermen call this passage the Slot, a natural channel carved between volcanic peaks. On this evening, 82 Allied ships crowd the waters off Guadalcanal. Transports, cargo vessels, destroyers, cruisers. It's the largest offensive force America has assembled since the war began, and every sailor knows they've kicked a hornet's nest. 2 days earlier, its Marines stormed ashore on Guadalcanal and seized a partially completed Japanese airfield. Since that moment, Japanese bombers from Rabaul have been hammering the invasion fleet. Men have died under those attacks. Ships have burned. But the fleet remains, and the Marines are digging in ashore. In a radio intercept room at Pearl Harbor, 3,000 miles to the east, cryptanalysts hunched over decoding machines track the Japanese response. The intercepts are fragmented, incomplete, but the pattern is clear. Something is coming. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, studies the reports with the careful attention of a man who knows that every decision reverberates across an ocean. The invasion of Guadalcanal, codenamed Operation Watchtower, represents a strategic gamble of extraordinary magnitude. If the Marines can hold that airfield, they control the sea lanes to Australia. If they fail, the Japanese advance continues unchecked. Everything depends on the Navy maintaining its protective screen around those vulnerable transports. Everything depends on the ships staying alert through one more night. Savo Island itself is unremarkable, a dormant volcano 3 miles across, covered in jungle. But its position creates a geographical trap. Ships entering from the northwest must pass either north or south of the island, squeezing through narrow channels barely 5 miles wide. The geometry favors ambush. The darkness favors attackers who know these waters. And on this night, the Japanese know exactly where the American ships are anchored. The Allied commanders have positioned their screening force to defend against expected threats. Submarines, air attacks at dawn, perhaps a probing surface action. They have radar. They have superior numbers. They have no idea what's actually coming for them in the dark. Vice Admiral Robert Gormley commands the South Pacific Theater from his headquarters in Noumea, New Caledonia, nearly 1,000 miles south of Guadalcanal. He's 59 years old, cautious by temperament, and aware that his logistics are stretched to breaking. The invasion fleet operating off Guadalcanal represents virtually every combat-worthy ship in the South Pacific. There are no reserves. There is no backup plan. If something goes catastrophically wrong, there's no cavalry riding to the rescue. Gormley has divided operational command among 3 admirals, one each responsible for a different aspect of the operation. It's a recipe for confusion, but it reflects the complexity of modern amphibious warfare. Carriers provide air cover, cruisers provide gunfire support, transports land the troops. In theory, they work together. In practice, they operate in separate spheres, with separate priorities and mutual suspicion. The wreckage field at Ironbottom Sound tells a story that took decades to fully piece together. Divers visiting these wrecks find artifacts frozen in time, coffee cups still on mess tables, shoes lined up in crew quarters, ammunition ready beside guns that never fired. The hulls bear wounds that puzzled investigators for months, massive holes below the waterline, explosive damage inconsistent with American understanding of Japanese capabilities. And some ships show evidence of catastrophic internal explosions. Others simply have sections missing, as if a giant had reached down and torn away steel plating. The destroyer USS De Haven rests at a steep angle, her bow section completely separated. The cruiser Astoria settled slowly, giving her crew time to abandon ship, yet still she took over 200 men with her. Each wreck represents not just a tactical defeat, but a human tragedy measured in hundreds of lives. Modern sonar mapping reveals the precise positions where these ships made their final stands. They cluster in 2 groups, separated by about 5 miles of seabed. The northern cluster, Vincennes, Quincy, Astoria, all sank within a few thousand yards of each other. The southern cluster includes HMAS Canberra and several destroyers. The distribution pattern tells its own story. These ships didn't scatter in panic, didn't flee in disorder. They died where they fought, or, more accurately, where they were caught before they could fight. The battle lines drawn on charts by historians show American ships sailing in neat patrol patterns, maintaining stations, following Doctrine. The Japanese track cuts through those patterns like a sword slash, a single column moving at high speed, approaching undetected, achieving complete surprise. The strategic importance of Guadalcanal crystallized in July 1942 when reconnaissance flights photographed a Japanese airfield under construction on the island's north coast. American planners immediately grasped the implications. An operational airfield on Guadalcanal would place Japanese bombers within range of the Allied supply line to Australia. Ships carrying reinforcements, food, ammunition, fuel, everything needed to sustain the war effort in the South Pacific, would run a gauntlet of air attacks. The entire Allied position in the region would become untenable. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations in Washington, pushed for immediate action despite objections from Army commanders who wanted more time to prepare. King understood that in war, geography and timing often matter more than perfect preparation. Guadalcanal had to be taken before that airfield became operational, which meant invading now with whatever forces were available. The invasion force assembled in late July represented a logistical miracle and a calculated risk. The 1st Marine Division, training in New Zealand, received orders to embark with less than 2 weeks' notice. Equipment remained scattered across multiple ships. Units were under strength, supplies were incomplete, but the Marines loaded their transports and steamed north, knowing they were racing the calendar. On August 7, 1942, they hit the beaches on Guadalcanal and nearby Tulagi with surprising ease. Japanese construction workers fled into the jungle. The airfield fell without serious resistance. By nightfall, Marines controlled the prize, Henderson Field, named for a pilot killed at Midway. They also controlled a defensive perimeter that would need to be held against everything the Japanese could throw at them. And that's when the real fighting would begin. The waters around Savo Island appear peaceful in daylight. Tourist dive operators visit the wrecks under carefully controlled conditions, respecting the war grave designations that protect these sites. Survivors of the battle, those still living, sometimes return to the place where their ships went down. They stand on the decks of modern vessels and stare at the calm surface, remembering when it was filled with burning oil and drowning men. The contrast between the tranquil present and the violent past is almost unbearable. This is where empires clashed in darkness. This is where young men died in confusion and terror, many of them never understanding what hit them. This is Ironbottom Sound, and on the night of August 8th to 9th, 1942, it earned its name in blood and steel, and the kind of defeat that haunts a Navy's institutional memory for generations. The story of what happened here begins with good intentions, inadequate preparation, and 3 admirals who couldn't agree on who was actually in command. July 5th, 1942. In a briefing room at Pearl Harbor, aerial reconnaissance photographs spread across a table reveal something that turns a defensive war into an offensive one. The black and white images show Guadalcanal's northern coast, and there, clear as day, are the unmistakable patterns of airfield construction. Graders have carved a runway through the jungle. Construction equipment dots the site. Intelligence estimates suggest completion within weeks, perhaps days. The Admiral Chester Nimitz studies the photographs with the intense focus of a man calculating odds he doesn't like. Admiral Ernest King, attending via secure telephone from Washington, makes the decision that will define the next 6 months. Guadalcanal must be taken, and it must be taken now. The assembled officers understand what this means. America has been on the defensive since Pearl Harbor. This will be the first major offensive operation, and they have roughly 4 weeks to plan what should take 6 months. The target selection wasn't complicated. Guadalcanal chose itself by virtue of geography and Japanese construction schedules. But selecting a target and mounting an invasion are separated by an ocean of logistical complexity. The 1st Marine Division, training in New Zealand under Major General Alexander Vandegrift, and represented the only significant ground combat force available in the South Pacific. They were at roughly 75% strength, still absorbing replacements, still working up to combat readiness. Vandegrift learned of his mission on July 9th, giving him less than 4 weeks to plan an amphibious assault against an unknown enemy on unfamiliar terrain with incomplete intelligence. His division lacked basic equipment. Some artillery pieces hadn't arrived, landing craft were in short supply. Supplies were scattered across multiple cargo ships, in a loading configuration that made no tactical sense. It was chaos, but it was the only option available. The Marines called it Operation Shoestring, and the nickname captured the desperate improvisation that characterized the planning phase. In Wellington, New Zealand, Marines unloaded cargo ships on the docks and then reloaded them in combat configuration. Ammunition and rations accessible for quick offloading, equipment packed by priority rather than by manifest. Local stevedores watched in amazement as these Americans worked around the clock. Driven by a deadline, they refused to explain. The entire waterfront became a massive jigsaw puzzle as officers tried to match units with equipment, with transport capacity. Some battalions discovered their heavy weapons had been loaded on different ships. Supply officers found that 3 weeks of rations had been packed at the bottom of holds that would take days to unload. It was amateur hour on a professional stage, but the amateurs were learning fast. The naval component of Operation Watchtower assembled from scattered squadrons across the Pacific. Vice Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, commanding Task Force 61, brought 3 carriers, Enterprise, Saratoga, and Wasp. These represented virtually the entire American carrier and strengthened the Pacific theater. Their air groups would provide cover for the invasion and defend against Japanese air attacks from Rabaul. Rear Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner commanded the amphibious force, the transports and cargo ships carrying the Marines and their supplies. Turner was 57 years old, brilliant, abrasive, and utterly convinced of his own correctness on virtually every subject. Officers called him Terrible Turner behind his back, acknowledging both his competence and his personality. Turner and Fletcher had worked together before, and neither particularly enjoyed the experience. Fletcher distrusted Turner's aggressive instincts. Turner resented Fletcher's caution, but they would need to cooperate flawlessly for this operation to succeed. The invasion fleet departed New Zealand on July 22, 1942, steaming north into waters increasingly dominated by Japanese forces. The passage took 2 weeks, with ships making their way through island chains and across open ocean, maintaining radio silence, hoping to achieve strategic surprise. Intelligence suggested the Japanese garrison on Guadalcanal numbered around 5,000 troops, mostly construction workers and support personnel. The actual combat strength was unknown. The defensive preparations were unknown. The quality of Japanese troops was unknown. American planners operated in a fog of uncertainty, at making assumptions they hoped were reasonable, and preparing for contingencies they hoped would never materialize. The Marines conducted rehearsals at Savo Island in Fiji, practicing amphibious landings in conditions that bore little resemblance to what they'd face at Guadalcanal. Equipment failed, timing went wrong, boats landed in the wrong places. It was discouraging, but there was no time for additional rehearsals. August 7, 1942, 0614 hours. The invasion begins with a naval bombardment that shatters the pre-dawn darkness. Cruisers and destroyers pour shells into suspected Japanese positions along the beaches. The noise is tremendous, a rolling thunder that echoes off the hills and sends flocks of tropical birds wheeling into the sky. At 0910, the first wave of Marines hits the beaches on Guadalcanal. They wade ashore expecting fierce resistance, weapons ready, nerves taut. They find abandoned positions. The Japanese construction workers have fled into the interior, taking what they could carry and leaving behind a partially completed airfield. Construction equipment, supplies, food, even rice still cooking in pots. By afternoon, Marines control the airfield and begin defensive preparations. On nearby Tulagi and Gavutu Islands, the fighting is heavier. Japanese naval troops resist with fanatical determination. But by nightfall, those positions also fall. The first day of Operation Watchtower exceeds all expectations. It's too easy, and that makes the veterans nervous. The Japanese reaction is swift and violent. At midday on August 7th, radar operators on the screening destroyers pick up contacts inbound from the northwest. Japanese bombers from Rabaul, over 700 miles away, coming to destroy the invasion fleet. The raid involves 27 twin-engine bombers escorted by fighters, threading through tropical rain squalls, navigating by dead reckoning to find the American ships. Fletcher's carriers launch interceptors. The resulting air battle sprawls across 100 miles of sky, with Japanese bombers pressing attacks against the transport ships, while American fighters try to break up their formations. Several bombers get through. The transport George F. Elliott takes a bomb hit and begins to burn. Destroyer Jarvis takes a torpedo hit that tears into her bow. But most of the Japanese aircraft are shot down or driven off, and the invasion continues. The second day brings more air attacks, bombers and torpedo planes in coordinated waves. The screening ships fill the sky with anti-aircraft fire. More Japanese planes fall, more American ships take damage, and Admiral Fletcher begins to count the cost. By August 8th, the fleet has been under air attack for 2 days straight. Fletcher's carriers have been launching and recovering aircraft almost continuously. His fighter strength has declined from 99 aircraft to 78 operational machines, 21 lost to combat, mechanical failure, and operational accidents. Fuel consumption is higher than expected. Destroyer fuel tanks hover around 50%, which Fletcher considers dangerously low, despite the presence of oilers capable of refueling at sea. At 1800 hours on August 8th, Larry Fletcher sends a message to Vice Admiral Robert Gormley, copying Admiral Turner. Fighter strength reduced from 99 to 78. In view of large number of enemy torpedo planes and bombers in this area, I recommend immediate withdrawal of my carriers. Gormley, 3 days of steaming time away in Noumea, approves the request. Fletcher begins preparations to withdraw south, out of range of Japanese air attacks. He gives Turner 12 hours' notice. The Marines ashore have no idea their air cover is about to disappear. Turner receives Fletcher's withdrawal message with barely controlled fury. The transports have unloaded only about half their supplies: food, ammunition, construction equipment, all the material needed to sustain 17,000 Marines on a hostile island. Turner calculates that, without air cover, his vulnerable transports and cargo ships will be sitting ducks for Japanese air attacks come morning. He has no choice but to follow Fletcher south, which means the Marines will be left ashore with inadequate supplies and no naval support. Turner calls a conference for 20-30 hours aboard his flagship, USS Macaulay, anchored in the transport area. He summons his senior commanders, including Rear Admiral Victor Crutchley, the British officer commanding the screening force of cruisers and destroyers. They need to discuss the withdrawal, coordinate the movement, and pray the Japanese don't attack before morning. The conference runs past midnight. Officers argue options they don't have, and while they talk, 8 Japanese warships approach through the darkness, moving fast, maintaining radio silence, and preparing to inflict the worst defeat in United States Navy history. The strategic situation on the evening of August 8th appears manageable from the American perspective. Yes, Fletcher is withdrawing the carriers, but that's a temporary setback. Yes, supplies are only half unloaded, but Turner plans to resume operations once the air threat diminishes. Yes, Japanese air attacks have been fierce, but the screening force has held them off. What nobody knows, what nobody even suspects, is that air attacks aren't the real threat tonight. The real threat is approaching on the surface, commanded by an admiral who has spent 20 years training for exactly this kind of operation. Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa is bringing 8 warships through the darkness. And he's bringing a weapon the Americans don't even know exists, the Type 93 torpedo called the Long Lance, which can kill ships from ranges the Americans consider impossible. The conference aboard Macaulay breaks up after midnight. Officers return to their ships. Crutchley heads back to his flagship, the Australian cruiser HMAS Australia, which has been removed from the patrol line to allow his attendance at the conference. Nobody is left in tactical command of the screening force, and out in the darkness, Mikawa's ships are less than an hour away. The conference aboard USS Macaulay on the evening of August 8, 1942, brings together 3 men whose mutual distrust will shape the disaster about to unfold. Rear Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner sits at the head of the table in his flag cabin. He's 57 years old, ramrod straight, radiating the kind of confidence that inspires respect and irritation in equal measure. Turner graduated from the Naval Academy in 1908, served in destroyers during the First World War, and built a reputation as one of the Navy's finest strategic planners. He's brilliant, meticulous, and absolutely certain he understands amphibious warfare better than anyone else in the Navy. His subordinates respect his intelligence while quietly resenting his abrasive style. Turner doesn't care what people think of him, which is fortunate because most people think he's insufferable, but he gets results. And in August 1942, results matter more than personality. Vice Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher commands from his flagship Saratoga, anchored about 30 miles south of Guadalcanal, and are ready to withdraw at dawn. Fletcher is 57 years old, a midshipman from the Naval Academy class of 1906, a veteran of Vera Cruz, and the senior carrier admiral in the Pacific after the losses at Coral Sea and Midway. He's methodical, careful, deeply concerned about fuel consumption, and haunted by the knowledge that America has only 3 operational carriers in the entire Pacific theater. Every carrier lost is irreplaceable for months. Every air group depleted takes weeks to rebuild. Fletcher makes decisions from a position of scarcity, calculating risks against resources America doesn't have. Turner sees Fletcher's caution as timidity. Fletcher sees Turner's aggressiveness as recklessness. They've clashed before, and they'll clash again, assuming they both survive the next 24 hours. A Rear Admiral Victor Crutchley commands the screening force protecting Turner's transports and cargo ships. Crutchley is a British officer, on loan to the American Navy, 50 years old, wearing the Victoria Cross earned during the First World War for exceptional gallantry in combat. He's professional, experienced, and acutely aware that he's commanding American ships in an American operation under American admirals who don't entirely trust foreign officers, even Allied ones. Crutchley has organized the screening force into 3 groups: a northern patrol of 3 cruisers and 2 destroyers, a southern patrol of 2 cruisers and 2 destroyers, and an eastern guard of 2 cruisers watching the transport anchorage. His flagship, HMAS Australia, patrols with the southern group. It's a reasonable disposition for defending against air attacks or submarines. It's dangerously dispersed for defending against surface attack, but nobody expects a surface attack. Nobody has received intelligence suggesting Japanese surface ships are anywhere near Guadalcanal. The conference aboard Macaulay concerns the practical mechanics of withdrawal. Fletcher's carriers will steam south at dawn. Turner's transports will follow. Crutchley's screening force will cover the withdrawal. The Marines ashore will be left with approximately half their supplies and a promise to return once the situation stabilizes. It's not ideal, but it's the best option available given Fletcher's fuel concerns and the intensity of Japanese air attacks. Turner briefs his commanders on the departure schedule, the formation they'll maintain, and the routes they'll follow. Standard procedure for a combat withdrawal. Officers take notes, ask questions, confirm details. Crutchley listens carefully, acutely aware that removing his screening force leaves the Marines vulnerable, but also aware that his cruisers can't defend the anchorage against sustained air attacks without friendly air cover. The conference runs past midnight. Officers are tired, having been at battle stations for 2 days straight. They're also confident that they've survived the worst the Japanese can throw at them. That confidence is about to be shattered. Fletcher's decision to withdraw the carriers ignites controversy that will burn for decades. His message to Gormley cites fighter strength reduced from 99 to 78 operational aircraft, and the presence of large numbers of enemy torpedo planes and bombers in the area. The numbers are accurate. The conclusion, that withdrawal is necessary, is questionable. Fletcher has 3 carriers, collectively carrying approximately 240 aircraft of all types. Losing 21 fighters is significant, but hardly crippling. The remaining 78 fighters are sufficient to maintain combat air patrol over the fleet. Fletcher also cites fuel concerns, noting that his destroyers are at approximately 50% capacity. But oilers are available for at-sea refueling, a routine operation the Navy has practiced extensively. The real issue, never explicitly stated, is Fletcher's institutional caution. He watched Lexington sink at Coral Sea. He watched Yorktown take mortal damage at Midway. He knows that carriers are precious, irreplaceable, and that losing another one might cost America the Pacific War. So, he withdraws, leaving Turner's transports without air cover and the Marines ashore without support. Whether this decision is prudent or cowardly depends largely on one's perspective and what would have happened if he'd stayed. Turner receives Fletcher's withdrawal notice with a fury he can barely contain. The two admirals have been feuding since before the invasion, arguing over everything from departure times to radio procedures. Turner views Fletcher as excessively cautious, unwilling to accept reasonable risks in pursuit of operational objectives. Fletcher views Turner as recklessly aggressive, yet insufficiently aware of how fragile American naval strength has become. Both men are correct about the other, which makes their conflict irreconcilable. Turner wants Fletcher to maintain air cover for at least 2 more days, giving the transports time to complete unloading. Fletcher wants to withdraw immediately, before Japanese air attacks inflict more losses. Gormley, sitting in Noumea, sides with Fletcher. The carriers withdraw. Turner is left holding the bag, commanding a fleet of vulnerable transport ships in waters that are about to become very dangerous very quickly. The command structure for Operation Watchtower is a masterpiece of military bureaucracy, divided authority, overlapping responsibilities, and insufficient coordination. Gormley commands the overall South Pacific Theater from Noumea, but he's too far away to exercise tactical control. Fletcher commands the carrier task force and the overall naval operation, but he's focused on preserving his carriers and delegates' responsibility for the amphibious landing to Turner. Turner commands the transports and the landing force, but the screening force protecting his ships is commanded by Crutchley, who reports to Turner through Fletcher to Gormley. It's a command chain that works perfectly in peacetime exercises and collapses under the stress of combat operations. Nobody has clear authority to make tactical decisions. Nobody has complete visibility of the operational picture. Nobody is empowered to change plans when circumstances change. This organizational dysfunction will prove fatal. And Crutchley faces a difficult choice when Turner summons him to the conference aboard Macaulay. Attending the conference requires Crutchley to take his flagship Australia out of the patrol line, temporarily removing the most powerful cruiser from the Southern screening group. Crutchley decides to attend personally rather than sending his chief of staff, reasoning that the conference concerns withdrawal plans that require flag-level coordination. It's a reasonable decision that creates an unreasonable gap in the defensive line. When Australia withdraws to attend the conference, Crutchley designates Captain Howard Bode of the cruiser Chicago as officer in tactical command of the Southern Patrol Group. This designation is verbal, informal, and never properly communicated to the other ships in the group. Bode goes to sleep that night, believing he's simply commanding his own ship. The other ships in the Southern Group don't know who's in command. When the Japanese attack materializes, nobody has authority to coordinate the response. The conference breaks up after midnight, with officers returning to their ships through darkness so complete that launch boats navigate by compass. Crutchley returns to Australia, but makes a fateful decision. Instead of rejoining the Southern Patrol, he stations his flagship near the transport anchorage, closer to Turner's command ship. His reasoning is practical. He'll be better positioned to communicate during the withdrawal, but it leaves the Southern Patrol with only 2 cruisers and 2 destroyers. More critically, it leaves them without a commander, Captain Bode, sleeping in his cabin aboard Chicago. Dee doesn't know he's supposed to be coordinating the patrol. The other ships don't know Bode is in command. The Northern Patrol, 7 miles away, has no idea there's confusion in the Southern Group. This organizational chaos exists while Japanese warships approach through the darkness, maintaining perfect formation. Following a battle plan they've rehearsed dozens of times, preparing to exploit exactly the kind of command confusion that now paralyzes the American screening force. The fundamental problem is that 3 admirals are operating with 3 different conceptions of the threat environment. Fletcher believes the primary threat is air attack, and that his carriers must withdraw to avoid losses. Turner believes the primary threat is still air attack, and that with adequate preparation, the fleet can survive 1 more day of bombing raids. Crutchley believes the screening force is positioned to defend against air attacks, submarine infiltration, or perhaps a probing surface action by Japanese destroyers. None of them conceive of the actual threat. A major surface attack by heavy cruisers executing a high-speed night torpedo assault. This failure of imagination reflects the institutional biases of the pre-war Navy. American doctrine emphasizes daylight gunnery actions and carrier aviation. Night combat is considered chaotic and indecisive. Torpedoes are viewed as secondary weapons, effective at short range but unreliable. The idea that an enemy might specialize in night combat, might develop torpedoes with extraordinary range and power, simply doesn't fit American assumptions about how naval war should be fought. The Japanese have spent 20 years training for exactly this kind of operation. The Americans are about to receive a catastrophic education. Rabaul, New Britain, August 7th, 1942, 1100 hours. Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa receives the message in his headquarters overlooking Simpson Harbor. American forces have landed on Guadalcanal. The report is fragmentary, based on scout plane observations and radio intercepts, but the essentials are clear. A major invasion fleet, transports, cargo ships, cruisers, destroyers, is anchored off the north coast of Guadalcanal, unloading troops and supplies. The partially completed airfield has fallen to the Americans. Japanese construction workers and the small garrison have retreated into the interior. The situation requires immediate response. And Mikawa is the man to provide it. He's 53 years old, a graduate of the Naval Academy at Itajima, a veteran of China operations, and a specialist in exactly the kind of operation this situation demands: a fast surface strike under cover of darkness. The Imperial Japanese Navy has spent 2 decades preparing for the war it's now fighting. While American doctrine evolved around carrier aviation and daylight gunnery, the Japanese developed a parallel specialization in night combat. The reasoning was strategic. In any Pacific War, Japan would face numerically superior American forces. Victory would require qualitative advantages: better training, better tactics, better weapons. Night combat offered all three. American ships of the 1920s and 30s had primitive fire control systems that worked poorly in darkness. Yet American tactics emphasized massed formations that were difficult to coordinate without light. American torpedoes were short-range weapons designed for point-blank attacks. The Japanese saw opportunity in this American weakness. They trained their crews to fight in pitch darkness. They developed optical equipment superior to anything the Americans possessed. And they created a weapon that would revolutionize naval warfare, the Type 93 torpedo. The Long Lance, as Allied intelligence would later call it, represented the apex of Japanese naval technology. Development began in 1928, when Japanese engineers experimented with oxygen-propelled torpedoes, seeking to eliminate the telltale bubble trail left by compressed air torpedoes. Pure oxygen propulsion offered multiple advantages: no visible wake, longer range, a higher speed, and a larger warhead, since oxygen tanks could be smaller than compressed air tanks. The technical challenges were enormous. Pure oxygen is explosive, requiring specially designed engines and careful handling procedures. Early prototypes exploded on their test rigs, killing technicians and destroying equipment. But the Japanese persisted, refining the design through hundreds of tests. By 1933, they had a working prototype. By 1935, the Type 93 entered service. By 1941, when war began, it equipped every major Japanese surface ship. The Type 93 specifications were extraordinary: 24 inches in diameter, 18 feet long, weighing nearly 6,000 pounds with a warhead containing over 1,000 pounds of explosives. Maximum range: 40,000 yards at 36 knots, or 20,000 yards at 48 knots. Compare that to the American Mark 15 torpedo: 21 inches in diameter, 6,000 yards at 46 knots, less than half the warhead weight. The Long Lance could kill ships from ranges where American commanders didn't even know they were under attack. And because it left no wake, defenders couldn't see the torpedo track and maneuver to avoid impact. Ships would simply explode, with crews assuming they had been hit by submarine torpedoes or even mines. The weapon remained classified at the highest level. Even damaged torpedoes were rigged with scuttling charges to prevent capture. American intelligence knew the Japanese had improved their torpedoes, but had no idea how dramatic that improvement was. They were about to find out. Mikawa's available forces on August 7th are scattered across the region, but he moves with impressive speed to assemble a striking force. The heavy cruisers Chokai, Aoba, Kako, Kinugasa, and Furutaka are in Rabaul or nearby anchorages. The light cruisers Tenryu and Yubari can be recalled from patrol stations. The destroyer Unagi completes the force. 8 ships total, assembled in less than 12 hours, preparing to execute a mission that under normal circumstances would require weeks of planning. Mikawa issues orders at 1400 hours. All ships will sortie at dusk, steam southeast through New Georgia Sound, the body of water Allied sailors call the Slot, and attack the American landing force at Guadalcanal. The operation plan is straightforward. Approach under cover of darkness, achieve surprise, launch torpedo attacks followed by gunfire, withdraw before dawn. Speed and violence will compensate for numerical inferiority. Darkness will neutralize American firepower advantages. The Japanese ships depart Rabaul at 1800 hours, steaming in single column at 24 knots, heading into the gathering darkness. Mikawa flies his flag from the heavy cruiser Chokai, positioned second in line behind the light cruiser Yubari. The formation is tight, ships spaced 600 yards apart, maintaining station by following the wake of the vessel ahead. This close formation is essential for night combat. It allows the column to maneuver as a single unit, concentrating firepower without risk of friendly fire. Each ship carries scout planes that will be launched before the battle to illuminate targets with flares. Upon each ship's torpedo batteries are prepared for rapid firing. The heavy cruisers each carry 16 long lances and fixed tubes. The light cruisers carry 8 each. Total torpedo complement for the force: 92 long lances, enough to saturate any target area. If even half of them find targets, the American fleet will be crippled. Japanese night combat training is rigorous to the point of obsession. Crews train in absolute darkness, learning to identify ship types by silhouette from distances exceeding 10 miles. Lookouts drill constantly, testing their night vision against progressively smaller targets. Gunners practice tracking imaginary targets using only binoculars and hand signals. The training standard requires that 90% of lookouts can identify ship types at 5 miles in total darkness. American crews, by comparison, struggle to identify ships at 2 miles on a moonless night. This disparity in trained vision gives the Japanese an overwhelming advantage in night combat. They can see American ships long before the Americans see them. They can track movements, plan attacks, achieve surprise, all while remaining invisible. It's not magic. It's not inherent racial superiority as Japanese propaganda claims. It's simply the result of thousands of hours of training that American crews have never received. Mikawa's operation order emphasizes speed and violence. The attack will focus on the transport and cargo ships anchored off Guadalcanal, the vulnerable supply vessels that sustain the American invasion. Sinking these ships will strand the Marines ashore without food, ammunition, or medical supplies. The operation accepts high risk. Mikawa's force must penetrate the American screening line, survive whatever gunfire the defenders can muster, complete the attack, and withdraw before American carrier aircraft can catch them at dawn. It's possible American radar will detect the approach. It's possible the screening cruisers will react faster than Mikawa expects. It's possible American air attacks the following morning will sink some or all of his ships. Mikawa accepts these risks because the potential reward, destroying the invasion fleet, justifies gambling with 8 warships. If he succeeds, the entire Guadalcanal operation collapses. If he fails, he loses 8 ships, but the Americans still have to deal with the Rabaul air groups. Either way, the Americans won't have an easy time. The dash down the Slot on August 8th unfolds with surprising smoothness. Mikawa's force steams southeast at 26 knots, hugging the coast of Bougainville Island, using rain squalls for concealment. Scout planes from the cruisers launch ahead of the column, flying low over the water to avoid radar detection, scouting the route and radioing back reports. By late afternoon, the force passes Bougainville and enters the open waters of the Slot. The weather is overcast, visibility poor, seas moderate, ideal conditions for a surprise attack. At 1800 hours, a lookout on Chokai spots a submarine periscope breaking the surface ahead of the column. Mikawa orders an emergency turn, and the column swings away, maintaining formation. Then the submarine, USS 38, gets a brief periscope view of Japanese cruisers steaming at high speed, but can't achieve firing position. The sub commander radios a contact report. The message goes out, encrypted, and begins its slow journey through communication channels. By the time it reaches American commanders at Guadalcanal, the information will be hours old and largely irrelevant. Mikawa's force continues southeast. By 2300 hours on August 8th, Mikawa's ships are approaching the western entrance to the passage between Savo Island and Cape Esperance. Crews are at battle stations. Guns are loaded. Torpedo batteries are ready. Scout planes have already launched, circling ahead of the column, preparing to drop flares over the American anchorage at the signal. Mikawa stands on Chokai's bridge, studying the darkness ahead through binoculars. His entire career has prepared him for this moment. In 2 hours, he'll either be a national hero or a footnote in a list of admirals who tried and failed. The ships reduce speed to 24 knots, trading speed for stealth, minimizing bow waves and wake turbulence that might give away their position. They maintain perfect radio silence. No lights are visible. The column glides through the darkness like a blade, and ahead of them, invisible but precisely located by the scout planes, the American fleet sits at anchor, unaware that death is approaching at 400 yards per minute. August 8th, 1942, 2200 hours. Destroyer USS Blue steams slowly northwest of Savo Island, her SC-2 radar rotating continuously, and painting returns on the small scope in the Combat Information Center. She's on picket duty, positioned 10 miles west of the main screening force, watching the western approaches for Japanese submarines or surface ships. Blue is a flush-deck destroyer, 1,600 tons, 4 4-inch guns, 12 torpedo tubes, built in the early 1920s and showing her age. Her radar is primitive by later war standards, maximum range about 12 miles, poor bearing resolution, prone to interference from rain squalls. But it's better than nothing, and tonight it's all that stands between the screening force and complete surprise. Lieutenant Commander Harold Stevenson Williams commands Blue, 33 years old, Annapolis class of 1930. He's been at battle stations for most of the last 48 hours. They've catnapping in his chair on the bridge, running on coffee and adrenaline. His crew is equally exhausted, but they maintain their watch with professional focus. Everyone knows the Japanese are somewhere out there in the darkness. The other radar picket, destroyer USS Rolf Talbot, patrols northeast of Savo Island, covering the northern approach. Together, Blue and Ralph Talbot form the outer sentinels, positioned to detect any approaching threat and radio warning to the screening force. It's solid doctrine, standard procedure for fleet defense. The problem is that both destroyers are positioned more than 20 miles from the main cruiser force, which means any warning they provide will give the screening ships only minutes to react. The doctrine assumes that enemy forces will approach slowly, cautiously probing the defenses. The doctrine doesn't account for an enemy approaching at 26 knots in perfect formation, willing to accept detection in exchange for achieving surprise at close range. Mikawa is betting that by the time the pickets detect his force and transmit warnings, he'll already be inside the defensive perimeter. It's a calculated gamble, and so far, it's working perfectly. At 10:26 hours on August 8th, an Australian Hudson bomber patrolling from Milne Bay spots Mikawa's force steaming southeast off Bougainville. The pilot counts carefully: 3 cruisers, 3 destroyers, 2 seaplane tenders, course south-southeast, speed estimated at 15 knots. The sighting is accurate except for 2 critical errors. He counts wrong, identifying 8 ships as 8 different types, and he underestimates their speed by nearly half. Then the pilot radios his report to his base at Fall River in Milne Bay, then continues his patrol. The report enters the communication system, gets encoded, gets transmitted to higher headquarters, gets decoded, gets analyzed, gets retransmitted. The process takes hours. The report eventually reaches multiple commands: Port Moresby, Brisbane, Pearl Harbor, even Fall River, Massachusetts, due to a routing error. But it doesn't reach Admiral Turner at Guadalcanal until long after the information has become obsolete. By the time Turner learns about the sighting, the seaplane tender force has already approached to within 50 miles of his anchorage. The second sighting comes at 11:01 hours, when another Australian coastwatcher, positioned on an island north of Bougainville, spots the Japanese column passing his location. This observer is more accurate. He counts 8 warships, mostly cruisers, steaming fast toward Guadalcanal. His radio report enters the same sluggish communication system, crawling through relay stations and headquarters, accruing delays at every step. Military communications in 1942 rely on high-frequency radio, which requires encoding for security, which requires human operators to encrypt and decrypt messages, which takes time. By the time Turner receives this second report, it's mid-afternoon, and he makes a critical misjudgment. He assesses the Japanese force as a seaplane tender group, planning to launch an air attack at dawn. Turner prepares his ships for air defense. He doesn't prepare for surface attack, because nothing in the report suggests that a major surface engagement is imminent. The third and most accurate sighting comes at 1800 hours, when submarine USS 38, patrolling west of Guadalcanal, spots Japanese cruisers steaming southeast at high speed. The submarine commander, Lieutenant Commander Henry Munson, gets a brief periscope look at the column, enough to identify heavy cruisers, enough to estimate course and speed, enough to realize this is a major force heading directly toward the American landing area. Munson transmits a contact report, but he's operating at the extreme range of his radio, and atmospheric conditions are poor. His message goes out, bounces off the ionosphere, and arrives at multiple receiving stations hours later. The submarine message arrives at Turner's headquarters well after midnight, long after its information could have altered American dispositions. Even if it had arrived immediately, the report lacks specifics that would have changed Turner's assessment. Cruisers approaching at high speed could still be planning an air attack or a brief bombardment followed by withdrawal. Nobody imagines they're coming for a sustained surface battle. The fundamental problem is that information moves at the speed of radio waves, while ships move at 26 knots. Even perfect intelligence reporting, which the Allies don't have on August 8th, requires hours to process and disseminate. By the time commanders receive actionable intelligence, the tactical situation has changed. This lag between observation and awareness creates a fog of war that technology cannot eliminate. The Allies have radar, which the Japanese lack. The Allies have coast watchers, patrol aircraft, submarines, an intelligence network the Japanese can't match. But all these advantages mean nothing if the information they generate doesn't reach decision makers in time to influence decisions. Turner sits in his flag cabin aboard Macaulay, surrounded by reports that are incomplete, contradictory, and outdated. He makes decisions based on the information he has, which is inadequate for the threat he faces. USS Blue's radar picks up intermittent contacts through the evening as rain squalls move through the area. The SC-2 radar struggles to distinguish between weather returns and solid targets, presenting the operator with a scope full of fuzzy blips that might be rain, might be islands, might be ships. At 23:42 hours, the radar operator calls the bridge. Contact bearing 270. Bowl range 14,000 yards. Lieutenant Commander Williams studies the scope. The contact is ambiguous. Could be a rain squall, could be a patrol aircraft, could be ships. Standard procedure requires investigating any unidentified contact, but investigating means breaking patrol station and steaming toward the contact, which leaves a gap in the radar picket line. Williams makes a judgment call. He logs the contact as unidentified aircraft and maintains his patrol station. It's a reasonable decision based on the information available. It's also wrong. The contact is Mikawa's lead elements, now less than 7 miles from the screening force, approaching at 24 knots, invisible in the darkness, preparing to launch their attack. The confusion on Blue illustrates a larger problem with early radar technology. The equipment provides data, but interpreting that data requires skill, experience, and judgment, that few operators possess in August 1942. Radar is new technology, introduced into the fleet starting in 1940, with most installations completed in 1941 and 42. Operators receive minimal training, often just a few weeks of classroom instruction, followed by on-the-job experience. They struggle to distinguish between different types of contacts. They don't always trust the equipment, which has a reputation for frequent malfunctions, and they operate without the accumulated wisdom that only combat experience can provide. Blue's radar operator sees a contact at 14,000 yards and doesn't recognize it as the threat it represents, because he's never encountered a high-speed surface attack before. He's looking for submarines or aircraft, because those are the threats he's been trained to expect. The actual threat, a column of surface ships approaching at battle speed, simply doesn't register as a possibility until it's too late. At 0100 hours on August 9th, the situation board in Turner's flag plot shows a tactical picture that's reassuring and completely wrong. The carrier task force is withdrawing south, known. Japanese air groups at Rabaul have suspended night operations, assumed. Submarine threats are minimal, hoped. The screening force is positioned to defend the transport anchorage against air attack at dawn, confirmed. And everything appears under control. The ships are at condition 2, with half the crew at battle stations and half resting. Radar pickets are maintaining their stations. Combat air patrol is scheduled to launch at first light. The Marines ashore are digging in, preparing for possible Japanese counterattacks. It's all very orderly, very professional, very reasonable. And in about 40 minutes, it's all going to explode into chaos when Mikawa's force penetrates the screening line and starts launching torpedoes at targets so close the cruisers can't miss. The American advantage in radar and reconnaissance has brought exactly zero tactical benefit because the information never reached the right people at the right time. The destroyer Patterson, patrolling south of Savo Island as part of the Southern Screening Group, maintains a sharp lookout as the night deepens. Her crew has been at battle stations for 2 days, catching sleep-in shifts, eating cold sandwiches, staying alert through sheer willpower and naval discipline. At 0143 hours, a lookout on Patterson's bridge spots something wrong. Ship silhouettes where no friendly ships should be, moving fast, approaching from the northwest. The lookout calls the officer of the deck, who grabs binoculars and confirms the sighting. Japanese ships, multiple contacts, range approximately 6,000 yards. Patterson's captain sounds general quarters, the crew is already at battle stations, and orders the radio operator to transmit on the voice radio circuit. Warning, warning, strange ships entering harbor. The message goes out on the TBS, talk between ships, circuit, as you're reaching all Allied vessels in the area simultaneously. It's the first and only warning the screening force receives. 3 minutes later, the Japanese open fire. 3 minutes of warning after 24 hours of approach. 3 minutes to react to a threat moving at 400 yards per minute. 3 minutes before the slaughter begins. The crew quarters aboard heavy cruiser USS Quincy are quiet on the evening of August 8, 1942. Half the crew is at battle stations, manning guns, operating radar, standing watch on the bridge and in the engineering spaces. The other half, permitted to rest under Condition 2, standing orders, sprawl in their bunks, trying to sleep despite the heat and humidity of the South Pacific night. Some write letters home, cramped handwriting on V-mail forms that fold into their own envelopes. Then others play cards in the mess decks, betting cigarettes they'll never collect. A few read paperback novels under dim red lighting, designed to preserve night vision. They're exhausted, having been at battle stations for most of the last 48 hours, responding to repeated air raid warnings, loading ammunition, securing equipment, standing watches that blend together into a continuous state of heightened readiness. Now, finally, they have permission to rest. The air attacks have stopped. The invasion is proceeding on schedule. Tomorrow they'll resume unloading supplies, then withdraw south to refuel and rearm. Just one more night to get through. On the bridge of USS Vincennes, flagship of the Northern Screening Group, Captain Frederick Reef Cole makes his rounds at 2200 hours. Reef Cole is 48 years old, Ace Annapolis class of 1917, a veteran of the First World War and decades of peacetime service. He's competent, careful, and aware that his ship carries Rear Admiral Norman Scott and staff, which means Vincennes is the tactical command ship for the Northern Patrol Group. Reef Cole inspects the bridge watch, checking that lookouts are alert, that the ship is maintaining proper station in the patrol box, that communications are functioning, everything is in order, the radar is operating, painting returns on the small scope. The gun crews are at their stations, ready to respond to any threat. But half the crew is below, resting, because Condition 2 is the standard posture for a fleet that's been under intermittent air attack, but currently faces no immediate threat. Reef Cole nods his approval and tells the officer of the deck, I think we're safe for tonight. Famous last words, though Reef Cole has no way of knowing that. In 3 hours, Vincennes will be burning wreck, and Reef Cole will be fighting to save his ship and his crew from disaster. The screening force disposition on the evening of August 8th reflects conventional doctrine for defending an anchorage against air attack and submarine infiltration. The northern force, Vincennes, Quincy, and Astoria, escorted by destroyers Helm and Wilson, patrols in a rectangular box pattern approximately 5 miles north of Savo Island. The southern force, HMAS, Canberra and USS, Chicago, escorted by destroyers Patterson and Bagley, patrols a similar box pattern south of Savo Island. The eastern force, light cruisers San Juan and HMAS Hobart, guards the approaches to the transport anchorage. Each patrol group steams at 10 to 12 knots, maintaining assigned sectors, watching for threats that are expected to come from the air or below the surface. The disposition makes sense for the threat environment the commanders expect. It's dangerously inadequate for the threat they're actually facing, a high-speed surface attack penetrating between the patrol groups. HMAS, Australia, the most powerful cruiser in the screening force, is conspicuously absent from the patrol line. Admiral Crutchley took her to the conference aboard Turner's flagship, and then, instead of returning to the Southern Patrol, positioned her near the transport anchorage where she can communicate more easily with Turner during the planned withdrawal. It's a reasonable decision for administrative convenience. It's a terrible decision for tactical effectiveness. Australia carries 8 8-inch guns, making her the heaviest-hitting ship in the screening force. Her absence from the Southern Patrol leaves that group with only 2 cruisers instead of 3. More critically, her absence leaves the Southern group without a designated commander. Captain Howard Bode of Chicago believes he's simply commanding his own ship. The other ships in the group don't know who's in tactical command. When the crisis comes, this command confusion will prove paralyzing. The crew routines aboard the screening ships reflect the exhaustion of sustained operations. Men have been sleeping at their battle stations, catching 15-minute naps while leaning against bulkheads or curled up on deck plates. The galley has been serving cold sandwiches and coffee for 2 days because the fires can't be lit under the cooking ranges while the ship is at battle stations. Sailors are dirty, unshaven, wearing life jackets that they haven't removed since the invasion began. They're also confident, having survived 2 days of Japanese air attacks without losing any of the screening ships. Yes, George F. Elliott burned and had to be sunk, but she was a transport, not a warship. Yes, Destroyer Jarvis took a torpedo hit, but she's limping south to safety. The screening force has done its job, protecting the transports while the Marines went ashore. One more night and they'll be through the dangerous period. Just stay alert, watch the radar, maintain the patrol pattern, and wait for dawn. Condition 2 is a compromise between readiness and endurance. And Condition 1, full battle stations, keeps every crew member at their assigned post, ready for immediate action. But no crew can maintain Condition 1 indefinitely. Men need sleep. Equipment needs maintenance. Some crew functions, cooking, cleaning, minor repairs, require personnel who can't be tied to battle stations around the clock. Condition 2 releases half the crew for rest while maintaining sufficient personnel to fight the ship if necessary. The watch schedule rotates, with men alternating between 4 hours on duty and 4 hours off. In theory, it allows sustainable operations over extended periods. In practice, it leaves ships vulnerable if combat erupts during the off hours. When Mikawa attacks, half of every crew will be below decks, resting in their bunks, wearing life jackets, but not at their battle stations. They'll have perhaps 2 minutes to reach their assigned posts before the torpedoes arrive. Many of them won't make it. The patrol patterns followed by the screening groups are predictable to the point of being dangerous. Each group steams a rectangular box pattern, turning at specified intervals to maintain their assigned sector. A competent observer could time the turns and predict each ship's position with reasonable accuracy. Mikawa's scout planes have been doing exactly that, plotting the patrol patterns, identifying the gaps in coverage, calculating the optimal approach route that will bring his force between the two groups without early detection. The American ships maintain their patterns because Doctrine calls for orderly patrols that cover assigned sectors. The Doctrine assumes that any attacking force will be detected by radar or visual lookouts at sufficient range to allow the patrol groups to concentrate and respond. The Doctrine doesn't account for an enemy willing to accept detection at close range in exchange for achieving surprise at point-blank range. On the mess decks of the cruiser Astoria, sailors play cards and argue about baseball. The Red Sox have collapsed in the standings. The Yankees are running away with the American League. The Cardinals look strong in the National League. It's familiar conversation, the kind of talk that normalizes the abnormal situation of floating in hostile waters thousands of miles from home, waiting to see if tomorrow brings more air attacks, or perhaps something worse. They're mostly young men, late teens and early 20s, many of them in combat for the first time. They've been scared and exhilarated and exhausted in roughly equal measures over the last 2 days. Now, they're just tired, ready for this operation to end so they can return to a rear area for rest and replenishment. They have no idea they'll never see another dawn. In 5 hours, Astoria will be on fire, her captain dead, her crew abandoning ship into burning oil. But for now, they play cards and argue about baseball, maintaining the illusion that survival is simply a matter of staying alert and following procedures. Captain Samuel Moore of USS Quincy tours his ship at midnight, checking on the crew, ensuring that equipment is properly maintained, offering words of encouragement to tired sailors who've been at their posts for too long. Moore is 50 years old. Annapolis class of 1916, a career officer who served in cruisers most of his professional life. He knows his ship intimately, every frame, every compartment, every system. He knows his crew, having commanded Quincy for over a year, taking her through shakedown, working her up to combat readiness, bringing her to the South Pacific for this, her first combat operation. Moore is confident in his ship and his crew. They've performed well during the air attacks, their gun crews coordinating fire with the other ships, their damage control teams responding quickly to any problems. He has no reason to doubt they'll continue performing well. In 2 hours, Moore will die on his bridge, still fighting to control his ship as she capsizes beneath him. But for now, he makes his rounds, offers encouragement, that projects the confidence that command requires. The silence on the bridges of the screening ships is broken only by occasional radio traffic and the quiet reports of lookouts scanning their sectors. The darkness is nearly absolute. No moon, overcast sky, visibility limited to a mile or two at most. The only lights visible are the masthead lights of the patrol ships, dim red lights that mark positions without illuminating anything useful. The radar scopes paint returns that blur together in rain squalls, making interpretation difficult. The sea is calm, with just enough swell to make the ships roll gently, a motion so familiar that sailors adjust unconsciously. It's a quiet night, a calm night, a night that promises nothing more threatening than another dawn air raid that the screening force will handle the same way they've handled the previous attacks. Nobody expects what's actually coming. Nobody has imagined the possibility of 8 Japanese warships penetrating the patrol line undetected and launching a torpedo attack from ranges the Americans consider impossible. In 30 minutes, imagination will become irrelevant. Reality is approaching at 24 knots, and reality is about to prove far worse than anyone's worst-case scenario. 0 hour minus 30 minutes. Mikawa's column passes Cape Esperance at the western entrance to the passage between Savo Island and Guadalcanal. The Japanese ships reduce speed to 24 knots, trading some velocity for stealth, though minimizing bow waves and wake phosphorescence that might betray their position. The formation remains tight, single column, 600-yard spacing, each ship following the wake of the vessel ahead. It's perfect formation, flying at sea, requiring skilled ship handling and constant attention. One ship losing station, One navigation error, one moment of inattention could cause collisions, confusion, disaster. But these crews have trained together for months. They maintain formation by instinct, each helmsman watching the fantail of the ship ahead, each engine room responding to bell commands with split-second precision. The column glides through the darkness like a sword blade, silent, invisible, lethal. 23:45 hours. Mikawa orders scout planes launched from the heavy cruisers Chokai, Aoba, Kinugasa, and Furutaka. The float planes, small single-engine reconnaissance aircraft, are catapulted into the darkness, their engines sounding loud in the night silence. The planes climb slowly, circling, gaining altitude, preparing to illuminate the target area with flares at the signal. American radar operators aboard the screening ships detect the aircraft, track them briefly, lose them in the clutter of rain returns. The contacts are logged as unidentified aircraft, possibly Japanese float planes from bases in the northern Solomons, possibly American patrol planes from Espiritu Santo. Nobody makes the crucial connection. Float planes operating at night almost certainly means surface ships nearby. The opportunity to sound alarm passes unused. The scout planes circle overhead, invisible in the overcast, waiting for Mikawa's order to drop their flares. At 0 hour minus 20 minutes, USS Blue's radar paints a contact at 14,000 yards, bearing 270 degrees. The radar operator studies the return, trying to determine if it's a rain squall, an island, or something else. The contact is solid, persistent, not moving in the pattern expected of a weather cell. The operator calls the bridge. Lieutenant Commander Williams examines the scope, makes his assessment. Probably an aircraft, possibly one of the scout planes that have been circling intermittently. He logs the contact and returns to his patrol. Blue is positioned northwest of Savo Island, with orders to detect and report any approaching threats. Williams has detected a contact. He's reported it to his own bridge. What he hasn't done is transmit a general warning to the screening force. Because he doesn't assess the contact as immediately threatening, in 15 minutes his assessment will be proven catastrophically wrong, but by then, the information will be useless. The most critical intelligence of the entire operation, enemy surface ships at close range, dies in a destroyer's radar room, strangled by uncertainty and inexperience. 0 hour minus 15 minutes. On the bridge of the heavy cruiser, Chokai, Vice Admiral Mikawa raises his binoculars and studies the darkness ahead. Japanese optical equipment is superior to American equivalents. Larger objective lenses, better coatings, superior design. Combined with the trained night vision of lookouts who've spent months preparing for exactly this kind of operation, the Japanese can see American ships at ranges where American lookouts see nothing but darkness. Mikawa's lookouts report ship silhouettes ahead, destroyers on patrol, cruisers farther to the north and south. The American patrol pattern is clear now, visible in the positions of the ships and their movements. Mikawa confirms his attack plan. Penetrate between the two patrol groups, turn northeast, engage the northern group with torpedoes and guns, then wheel and engage the southern group before withdrawing. Speed and violence will overwhelm American responses. By the time the Americans understand what's happening, they'll already be sinking. 0 hour minus 10 minutes. The sea is glass calm, black under the overcast sky. The only sounds are the throb of engines, the hiss of water along hulls, the quiet voices of lookouts making their reports. Mikawa's formation is now inside the outer screen, passing between the radar pickets, approaching the gap between the northern and southern patrol groups. American doctrine assumes any attacking force will be detected at long range, 10, 15, 20 miles out, giving the screening ships time to concentrate, coordinate, bring their firepower to bear. That assumption is disintegrating in real time as Mikawa's column ghosts through the darkness undetected at ranges dropping below 5 miles. The Americans have radar. The Americans have scout planes. The Americans have submarines and coast watchers. All of those intelligence assets have reported Mikawa's approach at various times during the day. None of it matters because the tactical picture remains clouded by confusion, misinterpretation, and communication delays. 0 hour minus 5 minutes. Destroyer Patterson. 80 patrolling south of Savo Island as part of the Southern Screening Group maintains her watch. Her lookouts are tired, having been on duty for hours, peering into darkness that shows them nothing useful. The human eye, even when fully dark adapted, struggles in complete darkness. Lookouts scan their assigned sectors, seeing nothing, reporting nothing, while Mikawa's ships approach from the northwest. The first indication, something is wrong, comes at 1:43 hours, when a lookout spots ship silhouettes against the slightly lighter background of the western sky. He blinks, unsure of what he's seeing. He looks again. The silhouettes are closer now, moving fast, definitely ships. Definitely not American or Australian, because they're approaching from the wrong direction. He sounds the alarm. The officer of the deck grabs binoculars. May confirms the sighting, orders general quarters, grabs the TBS handset, and transmits the warning that will save some lives while arriving too late to save most. 1:43 hours. Patterson's warning, "Warning, warning! Strange ships entering harbor," crackles across the TBS circuit, reaching every Allied ship in the area simultaneously. On the bridge of USS Canberra, Captain Frank Getting hears the warning and immediately orders, "Full ahead, both engines sound action stations." The engineering plant responds, accelerating from patrol speed to battle speed. But acceleration takes time. A heavy cruiser displacing 10,000 tons doesn't leap forward like a sports car. The propellers bite into the water, the ship begins to accelerate. The interval between propeller revolutions shortens as engine room crews push steam to the turbines. Getting needs 3 to 4 minutes to reach full speed. He has 90 seconds. The bridge crew can see the approaching silhouettes now, dark shapes against the darkness, closing at combined speed, exceeding 50 miles per hour. Getting orders, searchlights manned, guns trained toward the contacts. His crew scrambles to respond, but they're fighting time, and time has run out. 1:43 hours plus 30 seconds. Aboard the Japanese cruiser Chokai, Mikawa gives the order, "All ships, illuminate and attack." 8 powerful searchlights snap on simultaneously, stabbing across the water, bathing the American ships in blinding white light. The effect is psychologically devastating, as men who've been peering into darkness suddenly find themselves in brilliant illumination, their positions exposed, their ships pinned like insects under a microscope. For a few seconds, perhaps 3, perhaps 5, nobody moves. American gun crews stare into the searchlights, unable to see the ships behind them, unable to target effectively. Japanese gun crews, positioned behind the searchlights, have perfect target illumination. They can see American ships in perfect detail, the bridge structures, the gun turrets, the water line. They aim carefully, training guns with precisions possible only when the target is brilliantly lit and the shooter remains in darkness. 1:44 hours. The Japanese open fire with guns and torpedoes simultaneously. Main batteries roar. 8-inch guns from the heavy cruisers. That's 6-inch guns from the light cruisers. Shells arc across the water, orange tracers marking their trajectory. The first salvos bracket the American ships, straddle them with plumes of water, then find the range. Shells smash into hulls, into superstructures, into gun turrets. 8-inch armor-piercing projectiles penetrate steel plating, explode inside compartments, start fires, kill men. The Americans try to respond, but their guns can't find targets. The searchlights blind them. The darkness beyond the lights hides the Japanese ships. Some gun crews fire at the searchlights themselves, hoping to knock them out. Other crews fire at muzzle flashes, aiming at the orange blooms that mark Japanese guns firing. But effective counter-battery fire requires range data, bearing data, and target identification, all the information that radar and fire control systems should provide, but can't, because the Japanese ships are too close, too fast, too intermixed with friendly ships in the radar picture. 1:44 hours plus 30 seconds. The torpedoes arrive. Type 93. Long lances, launched at ranges between 4,000 and 6,000 yards. Wakeless and invisible, traveling at 48 knots, carrying over 1,000 pounds of explosives per warhead. The Americans have no warning. The torpedoes leave no visible trail. The first indication of torpedo attack comes when the weapons detonate against ship hulls below the waterline. The explosions are enormous, massive geysers of water erupting alongside cruiser hulls, lifting entire ships partially out of the water, breaking keels, flooding engine rooms, and tearing holes large enough to drive trucks through. HMAS Canberra takes 2 torpedo hits on her starboard side within seconds. The detonations destroy her forward engine room, flood her after engine room, kill dozens of men instantly, and gut her engineering spaces. She loses all power. She goes dead in the water. She's defenseless. Her guns unable to train without power. Her crews unable to fight fires without power. Her pumps unable to control flooding without power. She's dying, and the battle is 45 seconds old. Captain Frank Getting stands on Canberra's bridge as his ship lurches from the torpedo impacts. He's 51 years old, Royal Australian Navy, commanding a heavy cruiser in what was supposed to be a routine screening mission. Now, his ship is under attack by an enemy he can barely see. Yes, and everything is happening too fast for comprehension. The torpedo hits shake the entire vessel, violent, hammering blows that sound like the ship has struck a reef. Getting grabs the bridge railing to keep his feet as Canberra shudders and begins to list. The deck lights flicker, the electrical systems fail. Emergency lighting comes on, casting everything in red gloom. Reports flood into the bridge from damage control parties, flooding below, fires amidships, casualties heavy, power gone throughout the ship. Getting orders counter-flooding to correct the list, but without power, the pumps won't run. He orders fire parties to contain the flames, but the fires are spreading faster than crews can fight them. He's losing his ship, and the battle has barely begun. The Japanese column shifts targets with practiced efficiency. Having crippled Canberra with torpedoes and gunfire, Mikawa's ships turn their attention to the second cruiser in the southern group, USS Chicago. Captain Howard Bode commands Chicago, and he's about to make decisions that will haunt him for the rest of his brief life. When Patterson transmitted her warning at 0143, Bode was asleep in his cabin below the bridge, exhausted from 2 days at battle stations. The officer of the deck didn't wake him immediately. By the time Bode reaches the bridge, the battle has already started. He sees searchlights illuminating Canberra. He hears gunfire. He sees shell splashes. His first order is to turn away from the threat, maneuvering Chicago to starboard, opening the range. It's a defensive reaction, arguably prudent for protecting his ship. It's also abandoning Canberra to fight alone. Chicago takes a single torpedo hit in her bow at 0147. The long lance detonates against the forward section, destroying the bow plating, flooding the forward compartments, but missing the vital engineering spaces. Chicago loses speed but maintains power. She's damaged but combat effective. Bode could turn back toward the fight, bring his guns to bear, support Canberra, engage the Japanese ships that are now clearly visible. Instead, he maintains his turn away from the battle, opening range, maneuvering to the south. His official report will later claim he was attempting to position Chicago for a torpedo attack on the Japanese column. His critics will claim he was fleeing. The truth is probably somewhere between. Bode is confused, frightened, operating without clear information about the enemy's strength or dispositions. He makes the worst possible choice, doing nothing while Canberra dies 5,000 yards away. The destroyers accompanying the southern group attempt to respond, but their actions reveal the chaos that comes from lack of coordinated command. Patterson, having transmitted the warning, turns toward the Japanese column and opens fire with her 4-inch guns. It's a brave but futile gesture. 4-inch shells can't penetrate cruiser armor, and Patterson's guns lack the range to effectively engage ships that are firing 8-inch main batteries. Patterson fires 30 torpedoes toward the Japanese column, but the firing solution is guesswork in the darkness, and none of the torpedoes find targets. Bagley, the other destroyer in the southern group, turns the wrong direction in the confusion, launching torpedoes to the east, away from the Japanese ships, wasting her primary armament on empty ocean. The lack of coordinated response illustrates what happens when the patrol groups lose their designated commanders. Nobody is coordinating the defense. Each ship fights independently, making decisions based on incomplete information, unable to concentrate firepower or support adjacent units. Canberra's crew fights to save their ship, even as Japanese shells continue to pound her. The main battery guns attempt to return fire, but without power they can't train the turrets, can't elevate the guns, can't load ammunition. The secondary battery, 8 4-inch guns and single mounts, fires where possible, crews loading and firing manually. But these lighter weapons can't significantly damage Japanese cruisers. Below decks, and damage control parties struggle against flooding that exceeds their capacity to contain. The torpedo hits have torn massive holes in the hull. Water pours into compartments faster than portable pumps can remove it. Men form human chains, passing buckets of water, trying to slow the inevitable. The ship lists further to starboard, 5 degrees, then 10, then 15. Getting orders abandon the forward magazines, fearing that flooding might reach the ammunition and cause catastrophic explosion. Men retreat from below decks, carrying wounded shipmates, leaving behind bodies they can't recover. Japanese shells continue to hammer Canberra with terrifying precision. The searchlights keep her illuminated, making her a perfect target. Shells smash into her superstructure, destroying the bridge, killing or wounding everyone there. Captain Getting takes shell fragments to his abdomen, severe wounds that will prove fatal. His bridge crew is decimated. The ship's gunnery officer is killed. The navigation officer is wounded. Communications are destroyed. Canberra has become a floating target, unable to maneuver, unable to fight back, unable to defend herself. The Japanese cruisers fire at leisure, ranging in on the illuminated target, walking their shells through her from bow to stern. In less than 5 minutes, Canberra absorbs 2 torpedo hits and approximately 24 shell hits. She's a wreck, blazing amidships, listing heavily, her crew abandoning their fighting stations and preparing to abandon ship. The southern screening group has been neutralized. 1 cruiser is dying, the other has fled. The destroyers have wasted their torpedoes. And Mikawa's column is turning north, undamaged, ready to engage the 2nd American Patrol Group. The northern screening group, Vincennes, Quincy, and Astoria, has about 5 minutes warning before the Japanese column reaches them. They hear Patterson's warning. They see searchlights and gunfire to the south. They hear radio reports of ships under attack. But they can't see what's happening. The darkness and distance conceal the details. The radio reports are confused, contradictory. Nobody knows how many Japanese ships are attacking or from which direction. Rear Admiral Norman Scott, embarked on Vincennes as commander of the northern group, tries to assess the situation from fragmentary reports. He orders his ships to increase speed, to prepare for action, but he doesn't know where the enemy is or in what strength. Yet the fog of war has descended completely. American commanders are making decisions based on guesses, operating in informational darkness more complete than the physical darkness surrounding them. At 0150 hours, 7 minutes after the initial attack, Mikawa's column completes its turn to the northeast and begins engaging the northern group. The geometry is perfect for the Japanese. Their ships are in line, a head formation, all guns bearing on targets to starboard. Perfect tactical disposition for maximizing firepower. The American ships are steaming in a patrol box, not line of battle, with 2 ships exposed to broadside fire, while the 3rd is partially masked. The Japanese open fire with full salvos, all main batteries engaging simultaneously. The volume of fire is overwhelming. Heavy cruiser. Quincy receives the first attention. His searchlights pin her against the darkness. 8-inch shells begin falling around her. Captain Samuel Moore stands on his bridge, trying to comprehend what's happening. He sees searchlights. He sees gun flashes. He asks his officers, "Are those ships ours or theirs?" The searchlights provide his answer by shifting to hold Quincy in perfect illumination. More orders commence firing, but it's too late. The Japanese have the range. Their shells are already incoming. Quincy attempts to fight back, her main battery turret swinging to bring guns to bear on the Japanese column. But effective gunnery requires range data, bearing data, proper fire control solutions, all the inputs that radar and optical rangefinders should provide, but can't, because the Japanese are too close and the situation is too chaotic. Quincy's first salvos fall short, and then over, then short again. the classic pattern of a ship trying to find the range in darkness. While Quincy searches for her targets, the Japanese are hitting her repeatedly. Shells smash into her superstructure, penetrate her armor, explode inside compartments. The after turrets take direct hits and fall silent. The forward turrets continue firing, but without effective fire control, they're firing blind. Within 2 minutes of the engagement starting, Quincy is seriously damaged and losing the fight. Within 5 minutes, she'll be sinking. Captain Moore will die on his bridge, still trying to save his ship, when the final torpedo hits and Quincy begins her roll to port. The horror of the Southern Group's destruction is measured not just in ships sunk, but in lives lost without purpose. Canberra's crew fights fires that can't be controlled, manages flooding that can't be stopped, tends to wounded that can't be saved. Captain Getting, mortally wounded, is carried below to the medical station where doctors can do nothing except make him comfortable while he dies. The ship lists further to starboard as flooding continues unchecked. At 0200 hours, less than 20 minutes after the first torpedo hit, Canberra's remaining officers make the decision to abandon ship. The crew begins going over the side, sliding down ropes, jumping into water that's covered in a thin film of fuel oil. Some men are injured, unable to swim, wearing life jackets that keep them afloat but don't save them from drowning in the oil. Others swim away from the ship, trying to reach the destroyers that are moving in to rescue survivors. As Chicago, damaged but still operational, steams away to the south, making no effort to rescue Canberra's crew. Captain Bode will later claim he was maneuvering for tactical advantage. Canberra's survivors will remember that Chicago abandoned them. 0151 hours. Heavy cruiser. Vincennes takes her first hit, a Japanese shell penetrating through the hangar deck where scout planes are stored, continuing through multiple decks, detonating in the ship's interior. The explosion starts fires and tears apart compartments, but worse is coming. Vincennes is the flagship of Rear Admiral Norman Scott, which makes her the priority target for Japanese gunners who understand that killing the command ship creates maximum confusion. Within 60 seconds of the first hit, Vincennes is under fire from multiple Japanese cruisers simultaneously. Shells rain down from 2 or 3 different directions, creating a crossfire that makes evasion impossible. Captain Frederick Reef Cole orders evasive maneuvers, but a 10,000-ton cruiser doesn't turn on a dime. By the time Vincennes begins her turn, she's already been hit a dozen times. The Japanese gunnery is terrifyingly accurate. Trained crews, excellent optics, target illumination, and short-range combine to create conditions where missing is harder than hitting. Vincennes is lit by searchlights from multiple ships, making her visible in perfect detail. Japanese rangefinders provide continuous updates as the range closes from 6,000 yards to 5,000 to 4,000. Fire control officers calculate solutions with mechanical precision. When the guns fire, the shells follow ballistic trajectories that predictability itself. Hit follows hit. Vincennes' armor, designed to defeat 8-inch shells at long range, provides inadequate protection at these point-blank distances. Shells penetrate through side armor, through deck armor, through bulkheads and compartments, exploding deep in the ship's vitals. At 0155 hours, a shell from the Japanese cruiser Kinugasa penetrates through Vincennes' hangar deck, continues through the ship's interior, and detonates in or near a magazine. The explosion is catastrophic, a massive fireball that erupts from multiple openings in the hull, lifting the entire midship section of the ship. The blast kills dozens of men instantly and starts fires that sweep through adjacent compartments. The damage control parties rush to fight the flames, but find their path blocked by twisted wreckage and their fire mains without pressure. The ship's electrical systems fail in sections, leaving some compartments in total darkness. Emergency lighting provides dim illumination that turns the interior into a hellscape of red shadows and orange flames. USS Quincy, steaming approximately 2,000 yards astern of Vincennes, finds herself engaged by Japanese cruisers from both sides simultaneously. The geometry is devastating. Japanese ships to port and starboard, both groups firing full salvos, catching Quincy in a crossfire from which there's no escape. Captain Samuel Moore stands on his bridge, issuing orders, trying to fight his ship against overwhelming odds. Quincy's main battery fires when possible. But the fire control solutions are guesses. The radar is overwhelmed by close-range contacts. The optical rangefinders can't distinguish individual targets in the confusion of searchlights and gun flashes. Quincy fires at muzzle flashes, at searchlights, at shadows in the darkness. Some shells hit. There's evidence of damage to the Japanese cruiser Chokai, but most miss, and missing doesn't matter because the Japanese aren't missing. At 0200 hours, 9 minutes into the engagement, Quincy takes a torpedo hit on her port side. The long lance detonates below the waterline, tearing a massive hole in the engine room, flooding the compartment instantly, killing everyone inside. Quincy loses power, her turbines wind down, her electrical systems fail. She goes dead in the water, drifting, helpless. The Japanese continue firing. They've hit her dozens of times already. Now they finish her with methodical precision. Shells tear through her superstructure, demolishing the bridge, killing Captain Moore and most of his bridge staff. Moore dies at his post, still trying to control his ship. His last words reportedly a calm, "We're going down, boys." The forward turrets fall silent as power fails and their crews are killed or wounded. The after turrets continue firing manually until Japanese shells destroy them. Quincy is dying, and her crew knows it. Heavy cruiser Astoria, positioned north of Vincennes and Quincy, initially escapes the concentrated fire that's destroying her sister ships. Her captain, William Greenman, recognizes the Japanese column approaching and orders commence firing before the enemy searchlights find his ship. Astoria's first salvos are among the most accurate American gunfire of the entire battle. Her shells bracket a Japanese cruiser, possibly scoring hits. But success draws attention. Japanese searchlights swing to illuminate Astoria. Multiple cruisers shift fire to engage this new threat. Within a minute, Astoria is under concentrated fire from at least 3 Japanese ships. Her brief advantage, firing before being illuminated, evaporates as shells begin impacting her hull and superstructure. Astoria's crew fights desperately to save their ship. When the 8-inch turrets lose power, crews load and fire manually, slower but still capable. When fires break out in the midship section, damage control parties attack the flames with portable extinguishers and fire hoses. When shell hits destroy the fire control systems, and gun captains aim by eye and fire on local control, the crew performs magnificently, but individual courage can't overcome the tactical situation. Japanese shells are impacting every few seconds. The fires spread faster than crews can contain them. The structural damage accumulates, frames bent, bulkheads breached, decks weakened. At 02:05 hours, Captain Greenman orders all guns to cease fire, attempting to signal surrender, or at least convince the Japanese that Astoria is no longer a threat. The Japanese keep firing. Surrender isn't an option in a night surface action. The Japanese have momentum, and they're not stopping until every American ship is destroyed or disabled. The northern group's destruction unfolds with terrible momentum. Vincennes hit repeatedly, listing, on fire, dead in the water. Quincy, capsizing slowly, and her port rail already underwater, her crew abandoning ship. Astoria, still floating but burning so intensely that flames illuminate the surrounding ocean. The 2 destroyers escorting the cruisers, Helm and Wilson, try to respond but find themselves outmatched and confused. They fire torpedoes toward the Japanese column, but the range and bearing solutions are estimates in the chaos. No hits. They fire their deck guns, but 5-inch shells can't stop heavy cruisers. They attempt to lay smoke to conceal the damaged cruisers, but the wind is wrong and the smoke drifts uselessly. The destroyers are brave and ineffective, watching 3 heavy cruisers die while being unable to significantly influence the battle's outcome. At 02:16 hours, USS Quincy begins her final roll. The ship has taken multiple torpedo hits, dozens of shell hits, has flooding throughout her lower decks, and fires raging in her superstructure. The list to port increases steadily. 20 degrees, 30 degrees, 40 degrees. Men still aboard abandon ship, sliding down the exposed bottom plating as the ship rolls. Some jump from the high side, falling 30 or 40 feet to hit the water. Others ride the ship down, trapped in interior compartments that they can't escape in time. Quincy's roll accelerates past 45 degrees. The starboard propeller clears the water, still turning slowly. Then the ship capsizes completely, rolling past 90 degrees, hanging for a moment upside down before the stern begins to sink. At 0235 hours, Quincy plunges beneath the surface, stern first, carrying approximately 370 men with her. Those who got off watch from the water as their ship disappears, leaving only burning oil and floating debris to mark where she died. Vincennes follows 15 minutes later. She's been hit by at least 74 shells and 3 torpedoes, though the exact count is impossible to determine from survivor accounts. Her entire midship section is a blazing inferno. The fires have reached the after magazines, and the crew has flooded them to prevent explosions, but that flooding adds weight low in the ship, increasing her list. At 0250 hours, Captain Reef Cole gives the order to abandon ship. The crew goes over the side, some diving from the bow, which is still relatively clear, others sliding down ropes and lines from the stern. Reef Cole remains aboard, supervising the evacuation. It's refusing to leave until he's certain all living men have escaped. At 0250 hours, Vincennes rolls to port and sinks rapidly, taking approximately 340 men with her. Admiral Scott survives, rescued from the water by a destroyer, but 340 of his men and their captain do not. Astoria, miraculously, remains afloat after the initial engagement ends. She's been hit by at least 65 shells, but most have struck her superstructure rather than her waterline. She's on fire, extensively damaged, dead in the water, but she's floating. Her crew fights the fires through the remainder of the night and into the morning of August 9th. They make progress initially, containing some fires, flooding compartments to create fire breaks, preventing the flames from reaching the magazines. But the fires are too widespread and too intense. They spread through ventilation systems, ignite spilled fuel oil, consume everything combustible. By noon on August 9th, Captain Greenman acknowledges that Astoria can't be saved. He orders abandon ship. At 12:15 hours, more than 10 hours after the battle ended, Astoria rolls to port and sinks, taking 216 men with her. She's the last casualty of the Battle of Savo Island, dying slowly while the sun shines and rescue ships circle helplessly, unable to save her. 0215 hours, August 9th, 1942. The surface of the water between Savo Island and Florida Island is covered with men, hundreds of them, scattered across several square miles of ocean, floating in life jackets, clinging to debris, all calling out for rescue or for shipmates they'll never find. The darkness is absolute. The moon hasn't risen. The overcast sky blocks the stars. The only light comes from burning ships, Canberra blazing to the south, Astoria burning to the north, smaller fires marking the positions where Quincy and Vincennes disappeared beneath the surface. The men in the water are covered in fuel oil, thick black residue that coats their faces, fills their mouths, makes breathing difficult. Some of the oil is burning, creating patches of flame that survivors must swim around, must avoid, must watch from distance while the screaming gradually stops. Seaman First Class. John Manning, 19 years old, floats in his life jacket and tries to understand what just happened. 15 minutes ago, he was at his battle station aboard Quincy, loading ammunition for the after turret. Then the ship shuddered from a torpedo hit. Then the order came to abandon ship. Manning climbed topside, found the deck tilting at impossible angles, slid down into the water. Now he's alone in the darkness, can't see more than a few feet. Can hear voices calling, but can't determine directions. The water is warm, at least. Tropical temperature, maybe 80 degrees. But Manning knows that men can die in warm water, can drown in calm seas, can disappear without anyone noticing. He starts swimming toward voices, hoping to find other survivors, hoping that groups are safer than isolation, hoping that rescue will come before exhaustion takes him. The sharks arrive within 30 minutes of the first ship's sinking. They're drawn by the sounds, the splashing, see the blood from wounded men who went into the water with injuries. The sharks are oceanic whitetips, common in these waters, aggressive feeders that will attack humans. The attacks begin sporadically, a man screaming, thrashing, then silence. Other survivors hear the attacks, can't see what's happening, can only imagine. The fear spreads through the groups of swimming men like contagion. Some men panic, thrash wildly, separate from groups, which makes them easier targets. Others link arms, forming human rafts, trying to present a larger target that might discourage attacks. The strategy works sometimes it doesn't. The sharks continue hunting through the darkness, and there's nothing the survivors can do except endure and hope that dawn comes before they die. At 0220 hours, Vice Admiral Mikawa's column completes its turn to the northwest, preparing to withdraw through the passage it entered. Mikawa faces a critical decision: continue south to attack the transport ships anchored off Guadalcanal, or withdraw immediately before American carrier aircraft can attack at dawn. His staff urges aggression. The transports are defenseless. Sinking them would cripple the entire American invasion. But Mikawa calculates the risks. Approaching the transport anchorage requires 2 more hours of steaming, 2 hours to conduct attacks, 2 hours to withdraw. That puts his force within range of American carriers at dawn, assuming the carriers are where he estimates. Mikawa doesn't know that Fletcher has already withdrawn the carriers south, out of range. Based on incomplete information, that Mikawa makes the conservative choice: withdraw now, preserve his force, accept the tactical victory without pushing for strategic objectives. The Japanese column steams northwest through the passage between Savo Island and Cape Esperance, maintaining formation, guns still manned, ready for further action. They pass the burning wreck of Canberra, still afloat but clearly doomed. They pass through the area where Quincy and Vincennes sank minutes earlier, steaming through debris fields and swimming survivors. Some Japanese lookouts report seeing men in the water, but the column doesn't slow, doesn't stop, doesn't take prisoners. This isn't cruelty, it's operational necessity. Stopping to rescue survivors would expose the ships to potential submarine or destroyer attack. Mikawa's orders are clear: withdraw at maximum speed before dawn brings American air attacks. The survivors in the water watch the Japanese ships pass, dark silhouettes moving fast, trailing wakes that create waves that wash over swimming men. And then the ships are gone, disappearing into the northwestern darkness. The first rescue efforts begin at 0300 hours when destroyer Patterson, having survived the battle undamaged, begins searching for survivors in the southern area where Canberra's crew abandoned ship. Patterson's searchlights sweep across the water, illuminating men floating in oil-covered life jackets, clinging to rafts, waving frantically. The destroyer maneuvers carefully, approaching groups of survivors, throwing cargo nets over the side, pulling men from the water. The crew works with desperate energy, knowing that every minute delayed means more men dying from exposure, exhaustion, or shark attack. They pull aboard men who are injured, burned, covered in oil so thick they're unrecognizable. The ship's medical personnel work on the fantail, treating wounds, administering morphine, covering bodies of men who died before rescue arrived. By 0400 hours, Patterson has recovered over 200 survivors. There are hundreds more still in the water. USS Bagley, the other destroyer from the southern group, joins the rescue effort at 0330 hours. Her crew deploys cargo nets, throws life rings, sends swimmers into the water to help men too injured to climb nets themselves. Some survivors have been in the water for nearly 2 hours. They're hypothermic despite the warm water, exhausted from swimming, or delirious from swallowing oil-contaminated seawater. The rescuers work methodically, pulling men aboard, moving them below decks, returning to search for more. The destroyer's crew quarters fill with survivors, wet, shaking, silent men, wrapped in blankets, drinking water, staring at nothing. Some cry, others sit in shocked silence. A few try to help the rescue efforts, standing on deck despite their exhaustion, pointing out swimmers the searchlights haven't yet found. False dawn comes at 0530 hours, a gradual lightening of the eastern sky that precedes actual sunrise. For the first time since the battle began, survivors in the water can see their surroundings. What they see is worse than darkness hid. The ocean is covered with debris, broken timbers, life rafts, pieces of equipment, bodies floating face down. The fuel oil slick extends for miles, a rainbow sheen that marks where ships leaked their bunkers as they sank. Here and there, clusters of men cling to floating wreckage, too exhausted to wave, barely able to keep their heads above water. The destroyers move from group to group, prioritizing larger concentrations, knowing they can't reach everyone, accepting that some men will die while rescue ships are saving others. It's a calculus of horror, and it continues through dawn and into morning. At 0600 hours, as the sun rises over Savo Island, the full scope of the disaster becomes visible. Canberra floats low in the water, listing heavily, still burning, clearly beyond saving. Astoria drifts several miles north, also burning, her crew fighting fires that will eventually force her abandonment. All wreckage marks where Quincy and Vincennes went down. Oil slicks, floating debris, life rafts surrounded by swimming men. Chicago limps to the south, her bow severely damaged but her engineering intact. Captain Bode preparing to face questions about his conduct during the battle. The transport anchorage appears untouched. 23 ships still at anchor, still unloading supplies, protected by a screening force that no longer exists. The Marines ashore have no idea what happened during the night. They'll learn soon enough when Admiral Turner announces the withdrawal of the entire fleet. The final casualty count staggers even hardened veterans. USS Quincy, 370 dead of 943 crew, including Captain Samuel Moore. USS Vincennes, 332 dead of 1,190 crew. USS Astoria, 216 dead. HMAS Canberra, 84 dead, including Captain Frank, getting who dies of his wounds shortly after dawn. USS Chicago, 1 torpedo hit, bow damaged, casualties light. Total American and Australian losses, 1,077 dead, 709 wounded. 4 heavy cruisers sunk, 1 heavy cruiser damaged. Japanese losses, 58 dead, 53 wounded, all casualties on the heavy cruiser Chokai from a single American shell hit. The exchange ratio is approximately 18-1. It's the worst defeat in United States Navy history, worse than Pearl Harbor measured by combat casualties, worse than any single action yet fought in the Pacific War. By noon on August 9th, the rescue operations wind down. The destroyers have recovered everyone they're going to find. And some survivors, nobody knows how many, have already drowned or succumbed to wounds or been taken by sharks. The ones who made it aboard rescue ships are the lucky ones, though luck is a strange word to apply to men who watched their ships destroyed and their shipmates killed in a 32-minute battle they never understood and couldn't fight. They huddle on destroyer decks, wrapped in blankets despite the tropical heat, drinking water, smoking cigarettes when their hands shake too badly to hold them steady. They don't talk much. What is there to say? They survived, others didn't. The reasons are largely arbitrary. The lessons will take months to process. For now, they're simply exhausted, traumatized, grateful to be alive, while wondering if they deserve that gratitude more than the men who died. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner stands on the bridge of USS Macaulay at 0700 hours on August 9th, 1942, and confronts a situation that threatens to destroy everything Operation Watchtower was meant to achieve. The reports from the overnight battle are fragmentary but devastating. 4 cruisers sunk, 1 damaged, over 1,000 casualties. The screening force effectively destroyed. Turner's flagship sits at anchor off Guadalcanal, surrounded by vulnerable transport and cargo ships that have been stripped of their cruiser protection. The carriers have withdrawn south. The nearest American naval forces capable of defending the anchorage are over 100 miles away. If Mikawa's force returns, if Japanese surface ships attack in daylight, Turner's fleet will be slaughtered as thoroughly as the screening force was destroyed in darkness. He has 17,000 Marines ashore who depend entirely on these ships for supply and support, and he has to decide, right now, whether to stay and continue unloading or withdraw and leave the Marines stranded. The decision tree is brutal in its simplicity. Stay. Continue unloading for another 12 to 24 hours, giving the Marines perhaps 60 to 70% of their total supplies, accepting the risk that Japanese ships or submarines or aircraft will attack the vulnerable transports. Leave. Withdraw immediately. taking perhaps 40 to 50% of the supplies ashore, accepting that the Marines will be short on food, ammunition, not construction equipment, medical supplies, everything they need to hold the island for any extended period. Turner reviews the inventory reports from his logistics officers. The transports have offloaded approximately half their cargo. The Marines have food for 37 days on half rations. They have minimal construction equipment for finishing the airfield. They have inadequate medical supplies for anticipated casualties. They lack barbed wire, sandbags, communications equipment, spare parts, and 100 other items that were supposed to be delivered over a 5-day unloading period that's now been cut to 3 days. At 0900 hours, Turner makes his decision. The fleet will withdraw. Every transport, every cargo ship, every remaining warship will depart before noon. The Marines will be left with what they have ashore, Nitty plus whatever can be unloaded in the next 3 hours of frantic cargo operations. It's not abandonment. Turner intends to return once the tactical situation stabilizes. But the Marines won't see it that way. They'll see the Navy steaming away, leaving them on a hostile island with insufficient supplies and no air cover. Turner drafts a message to Vice Admiral Gormley explaining the decision: screening force destroyed, carriers withdrawn, position untenable, withdrawal necessary to preserve remaining forces. The message is factual, professional, and cannot conceal the underlying reality that the Navy has been beaten and is running away. The transport ships resume unloading operations at 0730 hours, but the pace is chaotic rather than methodical. Cargo nets swing from booms, loaded with crates and equipment and supplies that may or may not be the items most urgently needed ashore. There's no time for systematic unloading, no time to verify manifests, no time to ensure that supplies are landing on the correct beaches. Crates pile up on the beach faster than work parties can move them inland. Officers make snap decisions about what gets unloaded and what stays aboard. Ammunition, yes. Construction equipment, no. Medical supplies, yes. Barbed wire, no. The Marines ashore watch the frantic activity and understand what it means. The Navy is leaving and they're about to be on their own. Major General Alexander Vandegrift, commanding the 1st Marine Division, receives official notification of the fleet withdrawal at 1000 hours. He requests a meeting with Turner to discuss the situation. But Turner has already departed the conference aboard Macaulay, too busy coordinating the evacuation to spend time in discussions that won't change the fundamental reality. Vandegrift turns to his staff and begins planning for a defense that will need to succeed with about half the supplies originally allocated. His division has 17,000 men ashore, but only 11,000 combat troops. The rest are support personnel. They are defending a perimeter 7 miles long with minimal ammunition, no air support, and uncertain supply lines. The Japanese control the surrounding waters and airspace. Japanese troops on the island have retreated into the interior, but remain a threat. The tactical situation is grim, and the fleet withdrawal makes it grimmer. At 1100 hours, the transport and cargo ships begin weighing anchor, and one by one they form into convoy, escorted by the remaining destroyers and the damaged cruiser, Chicago. Admiral Crutchley's flagship Australia has rejoined the formation, undamaged because she missed the battle entirely. Turner watches from Macaulay as the convoy takes shape, 23 merchant ships forming columns, destroyers taking station on the flanks, the whole formation preparing to steam south at 12 knots, painfully slow for warships, but the maximum sustained speed for loaded transports. The convoy will make for Noumea, 800 miles south, a journey of 3 days during which Japanese submarines or aircraft might attack at any time. Turner accepts the risk because staying is riskier. The Battle of Savo Island has shattered his screening force. He won't risk his transports in waters he can no longer defend. The Marines ashore watch the ships depart with emotions ranging from anger to resignation. They understand the tactical necessity. The Navy can't defend them without cruisers, can't stay without carriers, but understanding doesn't eliminate the sense of abandonment. They're soldiers, trained to expect that the Navy will maintain supply lines and provide support. Now the supply line is sailing away, and they're alone on Guadalcanal with half their supplies and no clear timeline for when the Navy might return. Some Marines are philosophical about the situation. They have their rifles, their mortars, their machine guns. They'll dig in and hold the airfield until the Navy figures out its problems. Others are bitter, a feeling that the Navy has left them in the lurch after getting beaten in a surface action that Marines know nothing about and couldn't have influenced. By 1300 hours, the convoy is hull down on the southern horizon, visible only as smoke from the transport stacks. The waters off Guadalcanal are empty except for 2 destroyers left behind to rescue survivors from the sunken cruisers and the burning wreck of Canberra, which still hasn't sunk, despite flooding and fires. The Australian cruiser is clearly doomed, listing heavily, abandoned by her crew, drifting slowly with wind and current. Destroyer USS Ellet receives orders to sink her, can't leave a blazing wreck as a navigational hazard, can't allow the Japanese to recover equipment or documents, can't devote resources to towing a ship that will never sail again. At 1600 hours, after ensuring all survivors have been evacuated, Ellet fires torpedoes into Canberra's hull. The Australian cruiser takes 4 torpedoes and more than 260 shells before finally sinking at 1700 hours. She's the last ship lost at Savo Island, dying slowly under friendly fire because the damage from enemy action had already killed her. The strategic consequences of Savo Island unfold over the following weeks. The Marines hold Henderson Field and begin operating fighters and dive bombers from its runway, giving them local air superiority during daylight hours. The Japanese mount sustained efforts to recapture the island, landing reinforcements at night, bombarding the Marine perimeter with naval gunfire, attacking repeatedly through terrain that favors defense. The campaign becomes a grinding attritional struggle that neither side can afford, but neither side can abandon. The waters around Guadalcanal earn the name Ironbottom Sound as more ships sink during subsequent actions. Destroyers, cruisers, battleships, transports. But Savo Island remains the worst single defeat. The battle that shocked the Navy into institutional reform, the disaster that cost over 1,000 lives in half an hour. On August 10th, Japanese submarine I-26, patrolling south of Kavieng, spots a formation of Japanese cruisers returning from their victory at Savo Island. The cruiser Kako, trailing the formation, makes an inviting target. The submarine commander maneuvers into attack position and fires a spread of 4 torpedoes. 3 hit Kako amidships, destroying her engineering spaces, breaking her keel, and sinking her in less than 5 minutes. It's a bitter irony. Mikawa's only ship loss from the operation comes not from American counterattack, but from another Japanese submarine that mistakenly identifies Kako as an enemy vessel. 271 men go down with Kako. The survivors, over 600 men, are rescued by accompanying destroyers. For Mikawa, the loss dulls his triumph. He won the greatest surface victory of the Pacific War and lost one of his ships to friendly fire. The Imperial Japanese Navy celebrates his tactical success while quietly noting his strategic failure to destroy the American transports. Mikawa will never command a major operation again. August 14th, 1942. It's the Navy Department in Washington releases a terse statement to the press. The Navy Department announced today that action occurred in the Solomon Islands area. Details are not available at present. 75 words, no specifics, no casualty figures, no acknowledgement that American forces suffered a catastrophic defeat. The statement is technically accurate and functionally meaningless. Journalists understand immediately that when the Navy provides no details, the details are bad. But without specific information, newspapers can't report the scope of the disaster. Headlines read, "Naval action in Solomons" and "Fighting continues near Guadalcanal," treating Savo Island as another skirmish in an ongoing campaign rather than the worst defeat in American naval history. The families of men killed in the battle receive telegrams. The Navy Department deeply regrets to inform you that your son is missing in action. Missing, not killed. Missing as if there's hope he might still be found. Missing because admitting he died means admitting ships were sunk. Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knox reads the casualty reports in his office overlooking Constitution Avenue and confronts numbers that dwarf previous losses. The Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942 cost the Navy 656 dead when carrier Lexington was sunk. That loss was publicized, mourned, incorporated into the narrative of a fighting Navy, taking losses while stopping Japanese expansion. Midway in June 1942 cost 307 dead. But Midway was a victory. 4 Japanese carriers sunk versus 1 American carrier lost. Those casualties were acceptable, even honorable. Savo Island killed 1,077 sailors in 32 minutes, and there's no victory to balance the ledger. 4 cruisers sunk, screening force destroyed, transport fleet forced to withdraw, Marines left stranded with inadequate supplies. By every measure, it's a defeat, and Knox must decide how much the American public needs to know about how badly their Navy was beaten. The decision to suppress information about Savo Island reflects multiple calculations that mix genuine security concerns with institutional face-saving. The security argument is plausible. Revealing the loss of 4 cruisers tells the Japanese exactly what they achieved, might encourage further attacks, but might demoralize American forces. The counter-argument is equally plausible. The Japanese already know what they achieved because they were there, so the only people being kept in the dark are the American public and the families of the dead. But Knox and his advisors choose suppression, releasing only the minimum information required to avoid appearing to hide casualties entirely. On October 12, 1942, more than 2 months after the battle, the Navy acknowledges losing 2 cruisers and 1 destroyer in the Solomon Islands. It's still a lie. The destroyer Jarvis was lost to air attack, not at Savo Island, and the Navy is hiding 2 additional cruiser losses. The families of the dead wait for information that doesn't come. Misses. Then Sarah Moore receives a telegram on August 15th. The Navy Department deeply regrets to inform you that your husband, Captain Samuel Moore, is missing following action in the performance of his duty and in the service of his country. Missing? Not dead. Missing. Sarah Moore knows her husband commanded Quincy. She reads newspaper accounts of action in the Solomons. She writes to the Navy Department requesting details. Her letters receive pro forma responses that provide no information. She contacts her congressman. The congressman receives the same non-answers. In October, when the Navy admits that 2 cruisers were lost, she assumes one of them must have been Quincy, but still receives no official confirmation. In March 1943, 7 months after the battle, she receives an amended telegram. The Navy Department deeply regrets to inform you that your husband, Captain Samuel Moore, who was previously reported missing following action, is now deceased. Deceased. 7 months to move from missing to deceased. 7 months of uncertainty for families who deserved immediate honesty. The Japanese, ironically, have better information about American losses than the American public. Radio Tokyo broadcasts on August 10th detail the results of a great victory in the Solomon Islands. 4 American cruisers sunk, 1 damaged, heavy casualties inflicted. American intelligence monitors pick up the broadcasts, translate them, forward them to Washington. The Navy Department reads Japanese propaganda that's more accurate than its own public statements. Japanese newspapers publish accounts from Mikawa's flagship, describing the battle in detail, the approach through darkness, the surprise achieved, the destruction of enemy ships. These accounts reach American diplomats in neutral countries who forward summaries to Washington. The Navy possesses accurate information about the battle and chooses to suppress it, even while enemy propaganda tells the truth. The institutional reasons for suppression become clearer over time. Savo Island represents a failure of American naval doctrine, training, and leadership at almost every level. Admitting the scale of the defeat means admitting that the Navy wasn't prepared for night surface combat, that American radar advantages were squandered through poor training, that command structures were inadequate, that officers made catastrophically bad decisions. These admissions would raise questions about how the Navy plans to prosecute the war, about whether current leadership is competent, about whether Americans should trust their lives to a service that just demonstrated such spectacular incompetence. The Navy chooses institutional self-preservation over transparency. Better to hide the defeat than explain it. Better to maintain morale than confront failure. Better to suppress information than face accountability. Congress eventually forces disclosure through the simple expedient of asking direct questions that the Navy can't deflect. In March 1943, congressional hearings on naval appropriations include testimony about ship losses. Admirals testify under oath about the number of cruisers in commission versus the number deployed. The math doesn't work if only 2 cruisers were lost in the Solomons. Journalists pick up the discrepancy. Congressmen demand explanations. Finally, in late March, the Navy releases a statement admitting that 4 cruisers were lost at Guadalcanal, still not acknowledging the specific Battle of Savo Island, still not providing details, still minimizing the disaster by folding it into the larger Guadalcanal campaign. The casualty figures, 1,077 dead, are released without ceremony or explanation. By March 1943, the war has moved on. Other battles dominate headlines. Savo Island becomes a footnote, a battle mentioned briefly in casualty lists without detailed analysis or public accounting of what went wrong. The suppression of Savo Island creates lasting bitterness among survivors and families. Men who lost shipmates feel their sacrifice has been erased, rendered invisible by a Navy more concerned with public relations than honoring the dead. Families feel betrayed by an institution that asked them to trust in their loved ones' service, but refused to trust them with the truth about how those loved ones died. The secrecy serves no clear purpose. The Japanese know the results. American commanders know the results. Hiding the information from the American public doesn't prevent the Japanese from exploiting their victory. It only prevents Americans from understanding the true cost of the Guadalcanal campaign and from demanding accountability for the failures that led to disaster. By late 1943, when the full scope of Savo Island finally becomes public knowledge, the battle has lost its power to shock. The Navy has fought and won subsequent surface actions that partially redeem the defeat. Guadalcanal has been secured. The Solomon Islands campaign has moved north. Americans are reading about victories in the Central Pacific, about island-hopping campaigns that are pushing toward Japan. Savo Island is history, and history that was hidden for over a year loses its emotional impact when finally revealed. The families who spent 7 months wondering if their husbands or sons might still be alive somewhere, somehow, have learned to live with confirmed death. The survivors who wanted their story told find that nobody's particularly interested in a defeat that's old news. The institutional lessons are being implemented in training and doctrine reforms, but quietly, without publicity, without acknowledgement that the changes were necessitated by spectacular failure. The question that haunts investigators who finally examine Savo Island in detail is simple. Why? Why did the Navy suppress information that the enemy already knew? Why did they lie to families of the dead? Why did they minimize the defeat rather than learn from it publicly? The answers are unsatisfying because they reflect institutional cowardice rather than strategic necessity. The Navy was embarrassed. The Navy was afraid that public knowledge of such a catastrophic defeat would undermine confidence in naval leadership. The Navy valued its reputation more than it valued transparency. These are human failings, understandable in context, but they don't justify 7 months of secrecy that serve no purpose except protecting admirals from criticism they probably deserved. The analysis begins in early 1943, when naval intelligence officers examined damage reports from Savo Island and subsequent battles, searching for patterns that explain why American ships are dying so quickly in night surface actions. The torpedo damage is particularly puzzling. American torpedoes, the Mark 15, have a maximum range of 6,000 yards and a warhead containing approximately 800 pounds of explosives. The damage patterns on American ships show torpedo hits at ranges exceeding 10,000 yards, with explosive effects suggesting warheads more than twice the size of American weapons. Something doesn't match. Either the Japanese have developed a radically improved torpedo, or American intelligence has fundamentally misunderstood Japanese naval capabilities. Both possibilities are disturbing, but the second is terrifying, because it suggests American ships have been fighting blind against weapons they don't understand. The breakthrough comes when salvage divers examining the wreck of USS Quincy recover fragments of a Japanese torpedo that failed to detonate. The fragments are brought to the Naval Torpedo Station in Newport, Rhode Island, where ordnance specialists attempt to reconstruct the weapon from pieces. What they find is shocking. A 24-inch diameter torpedo, larger than anything in American service, powered by an engine that uses pure oxygen rather than compressed air. The oxygen engine explains the extraordinary range and speed. Pure oxygen combustion is more efficient than air combustion, producing more thrust per pound of fuel. It also produces no visible wake because oxygen combustion doesn't generate nitrogen bubbles that create the telltale track behind conventional torpedoes. The Japanese have developed a wakeless torpedo with twice the range and warhead size of American weapons. It's a technical achievement that American engineers initially refused to believe because the safety challenges of handling pure oxygen seem insurmountable. The testing of recovered long-lance components proceeds through 1943 as more fragments are recovered from battle sites and damaged ships. Engineers at Newport reconstruct a partial weapon and attempt to replicate its performance. The results confirm the intelligence estimates, range of 40,000 yards at 36 knots, or 20,000 yards at 48 knots. Warhead weight: 1,080 pounds of Type 97 explosive, roughly equivalent to 1,200 pounds of TNT. Compare those specifications to the American Mark 15, range of 6,000 yards at 46 knots, warhead of 825 pounds. The long lance can kill ships from distances where American ships can't even shoot back. It's a first-strike weapon designed to destroy enemies before they know they're under attack. And the Japanese have been using it since the war began, while American intelligence remained oblivious. The development history of the Type 93 emerges through interrogation of captured Japanese naval personnel and examination of recovered documents. The program began in 1928, when Rear Admiral Kotoku Kanji, head of the Naval Torpedo School, proposed developing an oxygen-propelled torpedo to overcome limitations of compressed air designs. The Imperial Japanese Navy invested heavily in the program despite skepticism from conservative officers who considered oxygen propulsion too dangerous for operational use. Early tests justified the skepticism. Prototype torpedoes exploded on their test rigs, killing technicians and destroying facilities. But Japanese engineers persisted, developing specialized valves, purification systems, and handling procedures that made pure oxygen propulsion practical. By 1933, they had working prototypes. By 1935, the Type 93 entered service aboard cruisers and destroyers. By 1941, every major Japanese surface combatant carried long lances. American intelligence missed the entire development program. The strategic implications of the long lance explain much about Japanese naval doctrine and American defeats. Japanese night combat tactics centered on using long lances to destroy enemies before gun battles begin. The torpedoes would be launched at maximum range, 20 to 30,000 yards, while approaching at high speed. Multiple ships firing coordinated spreads would saturate the target area with dozens of torpedoes. By the time the torpedoes arrived, Japanese ships would be at gun range, ready to finish damaged targets with gunfire. The Americans, meanwhile, would be trying to understand why their ships were exploding from attacks they never saw coming. At Savo Island, Mikawa's ships launched approximately 90 long lances during the engagement. Even with a relatively low hit rate, perhaps 15 to 20%, that meant 15 to 18 torpedo hits against American ships in 32 minutes. No screening force could survive that volume of fire, especially when combined with accurate gunfire at close range. The comparison between Japanese and American torpedoes illustrates broader differences in naval development philosophy. The American Mark 15 was a conservative design that prioritized reliability over performance. It worked adequately in most circumstances, achieved reasonable hit rates, and could be manufactured in large quantities without exotic materials or complex production processes. The Japanese Type 93 was a revolutionary design that prioritized performance over cost. It required specialized factories, highly trained production workers, expensive materials, and complex maintenance procedures. Each long lance cost approximately 3 times what a Mark 15 cost to produce. But in combat, one long lance was worth several Mark 15s because it could strike from ranges where American ships couldn't respond. The Japanese accepted the cost and complexity in exchange for qualitative superiority. The Americans chose mass production and reliability. At Savo Island, qualitative superiority won decisively. The tactical impact of not knowing about the Long Lance crippled American defensive planning before the war even began. American doctrine assumed that torpedo attacks would occur at ranges of 5,000 to 8,000 yards, giving defenders time to detect torpedo tracks, maneuver to avoid hits, or at least brace for impact. The Long Lance made those assumptions obsolete. Ships could be hit by torpedoes launched from outside visual range in darkness, giving no warning, no chance for evasion. The first indication of torpedo attack would be the explosion against the hull. By then, the damage was done. American damage control procedures assumed torpedo hits could be managed through watertight integrity and counter-flooding. Long Lance warheads, carrying 50% more explosive than American weapons, created holes too large for damage control parties to contain. Ships hit by Long Lances died quickly, often before their crews understood what had killed them. The post-war analysis of Long Lance effectiveness identifies both its strengths and its vulnerabilities. The weapon was extraordinarily effective when used correctly, launched at long range against unsuspecting targets, in coordinated spreads that saturated defensive areas, during night actions when defenders couldn't see the launching ships. But it had weaknesses that American forces eventually learned to exploit. The oxygen propulsion system was mechanically complex and prone to maintenance problems. The handling procedures required specially trained crews who understood the dangers of pure oxygen leaks. The launch tubes were fixed installations that required the entire ship to be aimed at the target, limiting tactical flexibility. And, perhaps most critically, the Long Lances were expensive and difficult to replace. Japan entered the war with approximately 1,000 Type 93 torpedoes in inventory. They could produce perhaps 200 per year. By mid-1943, stocks were declining, and by 1944, Japanese ships were rationing torpedo usage to preserve remaining stocks for critical battles. The American response to the Long Lance discovery unfolds over several years. Immediate tactical changes include better radar training to detect approaching ships before they reach torpedo range. Always improved night combat doctrine that emphasizes staying outside 10,000 yards until targets are identified, and enhanced damage control procedures to handle larger torpedo warheads. Longer-term responses include accelerated development of American long-range torpedoes, though nothing equivalent to the Long Lance enters service before war's end. The Navy also invests in radar-directed gunfire that allows hitting targets beyond visual range, negating the Long Lance range advantage by making surface combat a gunnery duel rather than a torpedo ambush. By 1944, American tactical doctrine has evolved to minimize Long Lance effectiveness. Fight at long range with radar-directed guns, maintain high speed to complicate torpedo targeting, and concentrate forces to overwhelm Japanese formations before they can launch coordinated torpedo attacks. The legacy of the Long Lance extends beyond its direct combat effectiveness. It represents a case study in how technological surprise can decisively influence battles, how intelligence failures can cost lives, and how institutional assumptions can blind military organizations to capabilities they don't expect enemies to possess. American intelligence knew Japan was developing improved torpedoes. They underestimated how dramatic that improvement was because they didn't believe Japanese engineering could achieve what actually achieved. That failure of imagination cost over 1,000 lives at Savo Island and thousands more in subsequent battles before American commanders understood what they were facing. You need the lesson? Take enemy technological development seriously. Don't assume American superiority. Maintain intellectual humility about what adversaries might achieve. Remains relevant decades later. The Long Lance wasn't magic. It was engineering, sacrifice, and operational security that kept a war-winning weapon secret until combat revealed its existence. September the 14th, 1942. Rear Admiral Arthur Hepburn convenes a board of inquiry in a secure conference room at Pearl Harbor to investigate the Battle of Savo Island. Hepburn is 63 years old, a former commander-in-chief of the United States Fleet, respected throughout the Navy as a careful administrator who can be trusted to conduct a thorough investigation without being swayed by politics or personalities. His board includes 3 other senior officers, collectively representing decades of surface warfare experience. Their mission is to determine what went wrong on the night of August 8th to 9th, identify responsible parties, and recommend changes to prevent similar disasters. The investigation is classified at the highest level. No press coverage, no public hearings. The Navy will investigate itself behind closed doors. The testimony begins with survivors, junior officers and enlisted men who can describe what happened aboard the ships, but can't explain the command decisions that created the tactical situation. Ensign William Trump, officer of the deck aboard USS Quincy when the battle started, describes seeing searchlights and gun flashes but not understanding initially that they were under attack. He describes Captain Moore asking, "Nat, are those ships ours or theirs?" Before the Japanese illumination made the answer obvious. He describes the chaos on the bridge as shells began impacting, men wounded, equipment destroyed, Captain Moore issuing orders calmly, even as the ship was dying beneath him. Trump's testimony is factual, non-judgmental, and devastating in its implications. The American ships were surprised, unprepared, unable to respond effectively to an attack they should have anticipated. The Hepburn Board focuses particularly on Captain Howard Bode of USS Chicago. Bode survived the battle, his ship damaged but operational, and his conduct during the engagement is questionable at best. The testimony establishes that Bode was asleep in his cabin when Patterson transmitted the warning at 01:43. The officer of the deck didn't wake him immediately. By the time Bode reached the bridge, the Japanese were already attacking. His first order was to turn away from the fight, maneuvering Chicago to open range rather than closing to support Canberra. When Chicago took a torpedo hit in the bow, Bode maintained his turn away, continuing to open range instead of counterattacking. Throughout the battle, Chicago fired her guns ineffectively and made no effort to coordinate with other ships in the southern group. After the Japanese withdrew, Bode made no effort to rescue survivors from Canberra or to warn the northern group about the Japanese force approaching them. Bode's testimony before the board is defensive and evasive. He claims he was maneuvering Chicago to launch a torpedo attack against the Japanese column. He claims he maintained radio silence to avoid giving away his position. He claims he believed Canberra was still fighting effectively and didn't require support. The board finds these explanations unsatisfactory. Bode's track chart shows Chicago opening range from the engagement area throughout the battle. His radio logs show no transmissions that would have warned other ships. His action report provides no evidence of coordinating with other units in the southern group. The evidence suggests Bode panicked, fled the engagement, and then attempted to justify his conduct through after-the-fact rationalization. The board recommends that Bode be court-martialed for neglect of duty and failure to engage the enemy when opportunity presented. The investigation of the Northern Group's defeat is more complex because most of the commanding officers died with their ships. Captain Frederick Reef Cole of Vincennes, Captain Samuel Moore of Quincy, and Captain William Greenman of Astoria all died or were mortally wounded during the battle. They can't testify. They can't defend their decisions. The board must reconstruct events from surviving witnesses and physical evidence. The consensus that emerges is that the Northern Group was tactically surprised, despite having 5 minutes warning from the Southern engagement. The ships were at Condition 2, half their crews below decks. Their radar operators failed to detect the Japanese column approaching at close range. Their lookouts didn't see the enemy ships until Japanese searchlights illuminated American ships. The Northern Group never established coordinated defense. Each ship fought independently without mutual support, without concentration of fire. Within 15 minutes, they 3 modern heavy cruisers had been reduced to sinking wrecks. Admiral Victor Crutchley's decision to take HMAS Australia out of the patrol line to attend Turner's conference comes under intense scrutiny. Crutchley was the designated commander of the screening force. His absence during the battle left both patrol groups without higher-level coordination. The Southern Group didn't know who was in command. The Northern Group operated independently without communicating with the Southern Group. The two groups fought separate battles rather than a coordinated defense. Crutchley testifies that attending the conference was necessary to coordinate withdrawal plans with Turner and Fletcher. He testifies that he believed the patrol dispositions were adequate for expected threats. He testifies that he had no intelligence suggesting a major surface attack was imminent. The board finds Crutchley's decisions were reasonable given the information available, but notes that his absence contributed to command confusion during the critical period. Vice Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher's decision to withdraw the carriers is investigated, but ultimately not criticized by the Hepburn Board. Fletcher testifies that his fighter strength was reduced, his fuel situation was concerning, and remaining in waters where Japanese air attacks were expected would risk carriers that America couldn't afford to lose. He notes that Gormley approved the withdrawal, meaning it was a theater-level decision rather than Fletcher's individual judgment. The board finds Fletcher's decision defensible under the circumstances, though acknowledging that the carrier withdrawal left Turner's transports without air cover and contributed to the decision to evacuate before completing the unloading. The board's reluctance to criticize Fletcher reflects institutional politics. Fletcher is a vice admiral, a senior officer with political connections, and blaming him for Savo Island would require the Navy to admit that its carrier doctrine is flawed. The systemic failures identified by the Hepburn Board are more damning than individual mistakes. The board finds that American ships were poorly prepared for night surface combat. Radar operators lacked training in distinguishing between different types of contacts. Lookouts lacked the night vision training that Japanese sailors received routinely. Fire control systems couldn't handle close-range targets in darkness. Damage control procedures were inadequate for handling long-lance warheads. Command structures were unclear, with divided authority and insufficient coordination. Intelligence had failed to detect Mikawa's approach or assess the threat correctly. Communications were too slow, with critical information arriving hours after it would have been useful. The list of systemic problems is long, and fixing them will require institutional reforms that go beyond blaming individual officers. The board's final report, completed in May 1943, makes 81 specific findings and recommendations. It concludes that the defeat at Savo Island resulted from multiple failures: intelligence, command, training, doctrine, and leadership. It recommends courts-martial for Captain Bode and disciplinary action for several other officers. It recommends sweeping changes to night combat training, radar operator schools, damage control procedures, and command structures. It recommends that cruiser forces always maintain combat readiness in hostile waters, never splitting forces into separated groups, never allowing commanders to absent themselves from their command during potential combat operations. The recommendations are classified. They're implemented gradually through 1943 and 44, quietly, without publicity. As the Navy fixes problems it doesn't want to admit publicly. Howard Bode never faces court-martial. On April 19, 1943, while commanding the attack transport USS DuPage, Bode dies in his cabin from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He leaves a brief note, "My failure." The official finding is suicide, and though some officers suggest it might have been an accident while cleaning his weapon. Nobody believes the accident theory. Bode knew he was facing court-martial. He knew his career was finished. He knew his conduct at Savo Island would be examined in public proceedings that would destroy whatever reputation he had. Rather than face that humiliation, he took his own life. The Navy quietly closes his case. There's no court-martial. There's no public accounting. Bode's death allows the Navy to avoid a trial that would have brought Savo Island back into headlines. It's convenient for the institution, even if tragic for Bode and his family. 0220 hours, August 9, 1942. Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa stands on Chokei's bridge and faces the decision that will define his legacy. His column has just destroyed the American screening force in 32 minutes of combat. 4 heavy cruisers sunk or sinking, 1 cruiser damaged and fleeing, Japanese casualties minimal. The passage south to the transport anchorage off Guadalcanal is open. 23 vulnerable transport and cargo ships sit at anchor, loaded with supplies, crammed with troops, defended only by a few destroyers and light cruisers. Mikawa knows the location of these ships from scout plane reports. He knows they're defenseless. He knows that sinking them would cripple the American invasion, strand the Marines ashore without supply, potentially win the entire Guadalcanal campaign. And he knows that achieving that victory requires 2 more hours of steaming south, 2 hours of attacking transports, or 2 hours of withdrawal, 6 hours total before his force can clear the area. 6 hours during which American carrier aircraft might catch him at dawn. Mikawa's staff is divided. His operations officer urges aggressive action. The transports are defenseless. The opportunity is unprecedented. The strategic value of destroying the invasion fleet outweighs the tactical risk to the cruiser force. This officer argues that even if American carriers launch strikes at dawn, Japanese ships might survive through superior anti-aircraft fire and evasive maneuvering. The chance to win the campaign decisively justifies accepting risk. Other staff officers counsel caution. American carrier strength is unknown, position is uncertain, and getting caught at dawn by 90-plus carrier aircraft would be catastrophic. Or better to withdraw with the victory already achieved than to push for more and risk losing everything. The debate continues for 15 minutes while the column steams northwest, opening range from the transport area, burning time that Mikawa can't recover. The intelligence picture available to Mikawa is incomplete and misleading. His scout planes reported 3 American carriers south of Guadalcanal on August 8th. Mikawa assumes those carriers remain in roughly the same position, which would place them within 200 miles of his force, close enough to launch strikes at dawn that could reach his ships by 0600 hours. What Mikawa doesn't know is that Fletcher has already withdrawn the carriers south, out of range, concerned about fuel and fighter losses. The American carriers are actually 300 miles away, beyond range for effective dawn strikes. If Mikawa knew this, his decision might be different. But he doesn't know. He can't know. Intelligence in 1942 is fragmentary, outdated, and unreliable. Mikawa must make his decision based on assumptions about enemy dispositions, and those assumptions favor caution over aggression. The time calculation is brutal. 0220 hours. Decision point. Add 2 hours to reach the transport anchorage. 0420. Add 2 hours to sink ships and withdraw. 0620. Dawn at Guadalcanal on August 9th is at 0600 hours. Mikawa's force would still be within 50 miles of the anchorage at dawn, well within range of carrier strikes if American carriers are where he estimates. Japanese cruisers have good anti-aircraft batteries. Each heavy cruiser carries 8 5-inch guns and numerous smaller weapons, but carrier aircraft attacking in coordinated waves can overwhelm even strong anti-aircraft defenses. Mikawa has watched American dive bombers at Midway and Coral Sea. He knows what they can do to ships caught without air cover. The risk feels unacceptable to him. Better to preserve his force than gamble on victory that might cost him all 8 ships. The historical parallel Mikawa might have considered, though there's no evidence he did, is Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo's decision at Midway 3 months earlier. Nagumo commanded the carrier striking force that was supposed to destroy the American carriers. After sinking Yorktown, Nagumo faced a similar choice: continue searching for remaining American carriers despite growing fuel concerns and potential land-based air attacks, or withdraw with the victory achieved. Nagumo chose withdrawal, preserving his remaining carriers rather than pressing the attack. That decision was later criticized as excessively cautious, but Nagumo's reasoning was similar to Mikawa's. Better to accept a partial victory than risk total defeat. Both admirals commanded forces Japan couldn't afford to lose. Both prioritized force preservation over strategic objectives. Whether that caution was prudent or cowardly depends on one's perspective and what might have happened if they'd chosen differently. At 0225 hours, Mikawa makes his decision: withdraw. He orders the column to maintain northwest course at high speed. Passing through the same channel they entered, heading back toward Rabaul. The opportunity to attack the transports passes unused. His staff accepts the decision without further argument. Mikawa is the commander. His judgment is final. The Japanese ships increase speed to 30 knots, opening range from Guadalcanal as rapidly as possible. By 0400 hours, they are 90 miles from the island. By 0600 hours, dawn, they are 150 miles away, beyond effective range of carrier aircraft, even if American carriers had been in Nguyen where Mikawa estimated. The withdrawal is successful. No American air attacks materialize. Mikawa's force escapes undamaged, except for the single hit on Chokai from American gunfire, which killed 58 men but didn't significantly damage the ship. The strategic consequences of Mikawa's decision unfold over the following months. The Marines hold Henderson Field because the supply situation, while precarious, remains manageable. They operate aircraft from the field, starting in August, giving them local air superiority during daylight hours. The Japanese mount sustained efforts to recapture Guadalcanal, land battles, naval bombardments, air attacks, but never regained the initiative lost when Mikawa chose not to destroy the American transports on August 9th. The campaign becomes a grinding attritional struggle that Japan ultimately loses. Historians later argue whether destroying those 23 ships would have forced American withdrawal from Guadalcanal. The consensus is that it probably would have, without supplies, without air cover, without naval support. The Marines couldn't have held out indefinitely against Japanese counterattacks. Mikawa's caution, while understandable, may have cost Japan its best chance to win the Guadalcanal campaign. The Japanese Naval Command's reaction to Savo Island is mixed. Mikawa receives congratulations for the tactical victory. 4 enemy cruisers sunk is an extraordinary achievement. He also receives private criticism for failing to destroy the transports. The criticism is muted, not public, but it effectively ends Mikawa's career as an operational commander. He never commands a major task force again. His remaining service is in administrative roles, shore commands, positions that keep him away from combat operations. Whether this reassignment reflects judgment about his aggressiveness or simply normal rotation of senior officers is unclear. But the timing suggests that the Naval General Staff viewed Savo Island as a missed opportunity rather than an unqualified success. The tactical victory was brilliant. The strategic failure was costly. The counterfactual question, what if Mikawa had attacked the transports, remains forever unanswerable. The optimistic scenario for Japan. Mikawa's force sinks 15 to 20 transport and cargo ships, destroying supplies and killing thousands of American personnel. The Marines are forced to withdraw or surrender. Guadalcanal remains in Japanese hands. The Solomon Islands campaign ends before it starts. The pessimistic scenario, Mikawa attacks the transports but gets caught at dawn by American carrier aircraft. Several Japanese cruisers are sunk. The strategic objective is achieved, but at unacceptable cost. At the moderate scenario, Mikawa attacks the transports, sinks some but not all, withdraws successfully, and the campaign continues but with Americans facing greater supply challenges. Which scenario would have occurred depends on variables nobody could predict in August 1942. Exact carrier positions, weather conditions, American command decisions, luck. Mikawa chose certainty, withdraw with victory achieved, over gamble on greater victory with greater risk. Military history suggests this choice was reasonable, but not necessarily optimal. November 19th, 1942. The Naval Training Station at Newport, Rhode Island, opens a new facility. The Combat Information Center School, designed to teach radar operators, fire control personnel, and communication specialists how to process information and make decisions under combat conditions. The curriculum is built directly from lessons learned at Savo Island and subsequent battles. Students practice distinguishing between different types of radar contacts, aircraft versus surface ships versus rain squalls. They practice maintaining situational awareness during information overload, when multiple contacts appear simultaneously, and decisions must be made in seconds. They practice coordinating between radar operators, fire control directors, gun crews, and ship commanders. The training is intense, demanding, and directly relevant to winning battles in the Pacific. Every graduate will serve aboard a combat ship, where the skills learned here might mean the difference between survival and disaster. And the institutional response to Savo Island transforms American naval doctrine across multiple dimensions. First priority, night combat training. Before Savo Island, night battle exercises were occasional, informal, treated as secondary to daytime gunnery practice. After Savo Island, night exercises become mandatory for every surface combat unit. Cruisers and destroyers practice steaming in formation in complete darkness, Lookouts practice identifying ship types by silhouette in darkness. Gun crews practice tracking targets using only radar data and firing at ships they can't see. The training is difficult, expensive, and absolutely necessary. The Navy is learning what the Japanese have known for years. Modern naval warfare includes night combat, and the side that trains for it wins. The Combat Information Center concept revolutionizes how American ships fight. Before Savo Island, information was scattered. Radar operators reported contacts to the bridge. Lookouts reported visual sightings separately. Fire control officers made targeting decisions independently. The system was decentralized, slow, and prone to confusion when multiple contacts appeared simultaneously. After Savo Island, the Navy adopts centralized command and control. All information flows to the CIC, where trained operators synthesize radar data, visual reports, radio communications, and intelligence into a single tactical picture. The CIC commander advises the ship captain on threat assessment and engagement priorities. Decisions are made based on complete information rather than fragmentary reports. The transformation is profound. Ships become information processing organizations where sensor data is as important as gunpowder. The first test of the new doctrine comes at the Battle of Cape Esperance on October 11th to 12/1942. Rear Admiral Norman Scott, who survived Vincennes sinking at Savo Island, commands a force of 4 cruisers and 5 destroyers in a night engagement against Japanese cruisers attempting to reinforce Guadalcanal. Scott's ships use radar to detect the Japanese force at 14,000 yards, beyond visual range, giving the Americans critical minutes to prepare. The American column crosses the Japanese T, achieving the classic tactical advantage where all guns bear on targets, while enemy ships can only fire forward batteries. In 15 minutes of combat, Scott's force sinks 1 Japanese cruiser and damages 2 others while taking relatively minor damage themselves. It's the first American night surface victory of the war. The tactical success validates the new training and doctrine. American ships can win night battles if they use radar effectively and maintain tactical discipline. The technical improvements parallel the training reforms. Radar gets better, new models with improved range resolution, better discrimination between targets, more reliable performance in tropical conditions. Fire control systems improve. Radar-directed guns can hit targets beyond visual range, making night combat a gunnery duel rather than a searchlight shootout. Damage control procedures improve. Better watertight integrity, improved firefighting equipment, enhanced training for damage control parties. Communications improve. TIBS radio allows ships to coordinate in real time during battle, reducing the command confusion that paralyzed American forces at Savo Island. Each improvement is incremental, but collectively they transform American combat effectiveness in surface warfare. The November 13th to 15th, 1942, Naval Battle of Guadalcanal demonstrates both progress and persistent vulnerabilities. American cruisers and destroyers engage Japanese battleships, attempting to bombard Henderson Field. The 2-night battle is chaotic, brutal, and ultimately successful for American forces. The Navy loses 2 light cruisers and 7 destroyers, but the Japanese lose 2 battleships, 1 heavy cruiser, and 3 destroyers, and most critically, fail to destroy Henderson Field. Then American ships fight more effectively than at Savo Island, using radar for early detection, coordinating fire through CIC procedures, maintaining tactical coherence despite casualties. But the battle also reveals how far the Navy still has to go. Ships are still being lost to long-lance torpedoes. Command confusion still occurs under pressure, and individual training remains inconsistent across the fleet. The statistical improvements tell the story of institutional learning. In August through October 1942, American ships have approximately 25% success rate in night surface actions, winning 1 battle in 4, usually at heavy cost. By mid-1943, after training reforms and doctrinal changes have had time to take effect, the success rate increases to 60%. By late 1944, American ships win 80% of night surface engagements, often with minimal losses. The transformation is dramatic. The Navy that couldn't fight at night in August 1942 dominates night combat by late 1944. Savo Island's lessons, painful as they were to learn, created the foundation for that transformation. The leadership reforms are less visible but equally important. The Navy eliminates divided command structures of the type that paralyzed operations at Savo Island. Task force commanders receive clear authority over all units in their command. Subordinate commanders receive clear guidance on chain of command and decision-making authority. Staff training emphasizes coordination and communication rather than individual ship handling. The goal is to create task forces that fight as integrated units rather than collections of individual ships. When Admiral Raymond Spruance commands the Fifth Fleet in 1944, his task forces demonstrate the new doctrine's effectiveness. Hundreds of ships operating in coordinated formations, responding to threats in minutes rather than hours, concentrating firepower with devastating effectiveness. The organizational chaos visible at Savo Island has been replaced by professional competence earned through hard experience. The memorial services for Savo Island's dead occur throughout late 1942 and early 1943 as families receive official confirmation of casualties. There are no large public ceremonies. The battle remains classified, details suppressed. All individual families hold private services in hometowns across America. Churches in small towns dedicate plaques. The Naval Academy memorializes graduates lost in the battle. But the national recognition that usually accompanies major naval battles doesn't occur because the government hasn't publicly acknowledged the scope of the defeat. The men who died at Savo Island are mourned privately by families who understand they'll never see their sons or husbands again, but who don't fully understand how those men died because the Navy won't tell them. The survivors carry physical and psychological scars for the rest of their lives. Burns, shrapnel wounds, and injuries from abandoning ship mark many survivors permanently. But the psychological wounds are often deeper. Survivors' guilt from living while shipmates died, the recurring nightmares of burning oil and drowning men, flashbacks triggered by darkness or the smell of fuel. The Navy has minimal psychological support for combat veterans in 1942. Men are expected to cope, to move on, to return to duty. Some manage this successfully. Others struggle for decades, carrying trauma that won't be diagnosed or treated until long after the war ends. The human cost of Savo Island extends far beyond the 1,077 dead. It includes hundreds of survivors whose lives are permanently marked by what they experienced during 32 minutes of darkness. August 9th, 1992. 50 years after the battle, survivors of Savo Island returned to Guadalcanal for a memorial service. They're old men now, most in their 70s, some in their 80s. They've flown from America, not from Australia, from scattered locations where their lives took them after the war. Some have never talked about the battle, not even to their families. Others have told their stories so many times the words come automatically, polished smooth by repetition. They gather on the shore near Henderson Field, looking out at the water where their ships went down, where their friends died, where they somehow survived. The ceremony includes prayers, speeches, a wreath laying, but mostly it's quiet men remembering noise, the shriek of shells, the roar of fires, the cries for help they couldn't answer. A smaller delegation includes Japanese veterans of Mikawa's force. The presence of former enemies at the memorial creates tension initially. American survivors remember Japanese ships illuminating and destroying their cruisers. Japanese veterans remember orders followed, battles fought, comrades lost in subsequent engagements. But the old men find common ground in shared experience of combat's horror. They fought on opposite sides, but they all know what it means to see ships sink, to watch men die, to survive battles that could easily have killed them. The formal ceremony includes moments where American and Japanese veterans shake hands, exchange brief words through translators, acknowledge each other's service. It's not reconciliation exactly, too much pain for that, but it's recognition of shared humanity that war couldn't entirely destroy. The underwater surveys begin in the late 1990s, using advanced sonar and remotely operated vehicles to map the wreck sites precisely. The surveys reveal Quincy resting at 900 feet, all largely intact but heavily damaged, her hull torn open by torpedoes and shells. Vincennes lies at 1,000 feet, more broken, her midship section destroyed by the magazine explosion. Astoria rests at over 1,200 feet, her superstructure burned away, but her hull recognizable. HMAS Canberra sits at 2,000 feet, deeper than her American sisters, harder to survey, but clearly visible on sonar scans. The wrecks are protected as war graves. Unauthorized diving is prohibited. Disturbing the sites is illegal. The ships remain as they died, underwater monuments to the men who went down with them. The casualty comparison places Savo Island in grim historical context. The battle killed 1,077 American and Australian sailors in 32 minutes. Compare that to the entire Spanish-American War, and where the United States Navy lost approximately 400 men in combat across all engagements. Compare it to the Battle of Jutland in 1916, the largest naval battle of the First World War, where the British Royal Navy lost 6,000 men. But Jutland involved over 250 ships fighting for 12 hours. Savo Island involved 14 ships fighting for 32 minutes. By any measure of combat intensity, casualties per ship, casualties per minute, percentage of force destroyed, Savo Island ranks among the worst defeats in modern naval history. Only Tsushima in 1905, where the Japanese destroyed the Russian Baltic Fleet, rivals Savo Island for one-sided destruction. The campaign outcome partially validates the sacrifice. The Marines held Guadalcanal despite the naval defeat. Henderson Field remained operational, providing air cover that eventually won the campaign. The Japanese never recaptured the island despite sustained efforts. By February 1943, Japanese forces evacuated, ending their attempt to hold the Southern Solomons. The campaign cost both sides heavily, approximately 7,000 American dead, 31,000 Japanese dead, 60 major warships sunk, 20 American, 40 Japanese. But America won, and winning validated the strategy of offensive action in the South Pacific. Guadalcanal proved that American forces could seize and hold Japanese-controlled territory. Savo Island was a tactical disaster within a strategic victory. The men who died at Savo Island died winning a campaign, even if they never knew they had won. The turning point thesis argues that Guadalcanal, including Savo Island, marked the end of Japanese offensive capability in the Pacific. Before Guadalcanal, Japan was advancing. Malaya, Singapore, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, Burma, New Guinea. After Guadalcanal, Japan was defending, holding what they'd taken, unable to mount major offensives, gradually losing territories they couldn't reinforce or support. The Solomon Islands campaign consumed resources Japan couldn't replace, trained pilots, experienced ship's crews, modern aircraft, warships. The attrition was unsustainable. By mid-1943, Japanese naval aviation was crippled. By late 1943, Japanese surface forces were husbanding strength for decisive battles that never came. Whereas Savo Island fit into this broader pattern. Japan won the battle, but lost ships they couldn't replace, Kako, expended torpedoes they couldn't reproduce quickly, and failed to achieve strategic objectives that might have altered the campaign's outcome. The memorial at the Naval Academy in Annapolis dedicates a wall to Savo Island's dead. Bronze plaques list 1,077 names, alphabetically, rank irrelevant, officers and enlisted together. Visitors can trace fingers along the engraved letters, finding names of grandfathers or great-uncles, connecting with family history. The wall is part of a larger memorial to all Navy personnel lost in the Pacific War. But Savo Island occupies a prominent section reflecting the battle's significance. The inscription reads, "They gave their lives in the service of their country and the cause of freedom." It's standard memorial language, true but insufficient to capture what those men experienced. The wall can't convey the terror of burning oil or the chaos of ships sinking in darkness, but it preserves names that might otherwise be forgotten, ensuring that 1,077 individuals remain more than a casualty statistic. The question of deserved recognition haunts discussions of Savo Island. The battle doesn't occupy the same place in American consciousness as Pearl Harbor, Midway, or other famous engagements. It's not taught extensively in schools. It doesn't feature prominently in war films or popular histories. Partly this reflects the secrecy that surrounded the battle for over a year after it occurred, and partly it reflects that Savo Island was a defeat. And defeats are less appealing subjects for commemoration than victories. Partly it reflects that the battle, while tactically significant, didn't change the war's trajectory the way Midway did. But the men who died at Savo Island deserve recognition equivalent to other major battles. They fought with courage even when circumstances gave them no chance of winning. They died serving their country. Whether the battle is famous or forgotten shouldn't diminish their sacrifice. The final aerial view, taken from a helicopter in 2015 during another memorial service, shows Savo Island as it appears today: green, peaceful, largely unchanged from August 1942, except for a few villages and some overgrown Japanese fortifications. The water between Savo and Florida Island, the passage where 4 cruisers died, looks serene in tropical sunlight. Tourist boats occasionally transit the area. Sport divers visit the shallower wrecks, though not the protected war graves. The channel is officially named Sleepless Lagoon in recognition of the night battle fought there. But mostly it's just water, reflecting sky, giving no indication of the violence that occurred beneath its surface 70-plus years ago. The wrecks rest there still: Vincennes, Quincy, Astoria, Canberra, permanent memorials to the Night of the Long Lances, to the battle the Navy lost, to the 1,000 men who died learning lessons that helped win a war. The iron remains at the bottom. The sound remains quiet. But history remembers, even when the surface gives no sign of what lies beneath.